boys.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The lads.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The dudes.
Prepare yourself for BOYSCAST.
The bros.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The homies.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The dudes.
Experience
The BOYSCAST.
Welcome, everyone, to the BOYSCAST
Welcome.
interviews. The BOYSCAST interviews. That's the thing. They don't know about what we're capable of intellectually.
This one was quite the rabbit out of the hat.
Yeah, there's this guy, Balaji. He's been right about everything. He's one of probably the best Twitter accounts. Me and Danny just spent a couple hours with him after the podcast hanging in. And it was like, we were both
Smartest guy I've ever met.
Yeah,
Smartest guy I've ever met by far. Like, my head hurts a little bit right now.
We both left being like, fuck, that guy's smarter than us.
I knew he was smarter than us. I'm more just concerned with how much,
the extent,
how wide the margin
Well,
is.
it's interesting because, like I said, I've forever ago saw him on different podcasts popping up, and I was very like, who the hell is this guy?
Yep.
So anyways, actually we talk about it at the beginning, then how we ended up having him on the podcast, but I thought this was super cool. So
awesome podcast.
Everyone, the BOYSCAST interview series, the Tuesdays be coming at you.
Yeah, you know what to do.
All right, this is Balaji. To me, this was the whole thing was super very internet, where
you're like, are you in New York? And I'm like,
Yeah,
well,
dude.
I happen to actually be in New York right now.
No, because me and Danny have talked about you multiple times, even on the podcast, and you were one of those people that every time I kind of saw you pop up somewhere, I remember the first time was Tim Ferriss, I was like, who is this? I just thought, we both thought you were the man,
Yeah.
and then so Chris Williamson had him on, and he tagged me in something, and then I was like, yo, heard your podcast with Balaji, I thought it was sick, and then he messaged me immediately, and I was like, if you're ever in New York, and he's like, I'm here right now, and it was 5 seconds of being oh, this podcast was good, to being now you're in a studio, which is that not peak internet?
That's a lot of what I talk about in the book, because there's these
The network state.
Exactly, our community is really online, and then it's there. But so do you want to? Should I intro? How are you?
Well, I'll say why the quick thing of why I felt like people like you or the opinions I think are so sick is because everyone is always talking about what should happen. Yeah. And then I feel like you're kind of talking about what's likely to happen and then what to do about it.
Right.
Which is why I feel like me and him both immigrated here too, right? From Canada.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and you talked about that too, where there's a different mentality where all of this in Canada, and we're that's why you leave. You have to leave.
Right.
And everyone's still there being how to fix this. It's so I feel like that kind of was the type of stuff you were talking about.
Absolutely, right? Because the thing is, it is way easier to be against something than to be for something. And most of the time, most people's affection for a politician is based nowadays, especially on what they're against, more than what they're for.
Yeah, of course.
And so everybody can be very precise about what they're against. When you get them to actually say what they're for, suddenly a coalition breaks into 50 different factions.
Yeah, because
right?
people are I'm not for that. And you're like, okay, well, not that then.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And it's kind of think about all the places you are not versus the place you are. It's kind of like that, but in ideological space rather than physical space, So, part of what I was trying to do with V1 of the network state, and so just, for the audience, if they don't know,
Give a little primer.
Yeah. So go to thenetworkstate.com. It's a new book that I just wrote.
Can I describe it and you tell me if I'm right?
Sure. Yep.
This is what I thought. Essentially, you're saying if the way that you describe it is you're not crazy bullish on America as being the sole center of everything moving forward. And then you kind of see the world as centralized versus decentralized. And what it looks like moving forward is people sort of form communities online, and essentially they could even buy land and have presidents and stuff like that. And that's kind of what you think the future might look like. Or if it does look like something like that, you outlined how it will happen.
Yeah. So one thing I want
close?
to, yes, definitely in the ballpark and close. But I want to just kind of offer a few, asterisks, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I would say I'm definitely pro-American values in the sense that there's certain universal values of which the United States of America was the best representative of those. Fair play, equality under the law, rule of law, abiding by contracts, treating people with all that type of stuff, which has unfortunately, you're like, is that going away? It is unfortunately going away to some extent. You're getting more tribal. You're getting people mad at each other.
Well, we just moved here.
Yeah, that's right. I know.
But we moved here from Canada, where
you
it's
moved from Canada, right?
1 degree worse.
So in sort of the same way that torch was passed arguably from Greece to Rome, and then after a long delay from like Rome to the UK and UK to the US, right? Like, and each person being an imperfect messenger. There's I think the next torch pass is from the Americas to the internet. The internet is not the same as America. People think of it as the same, but it's really not the same. And in fact, in many ways, it's more. The internet is to the Americas what the Americas were to the old world of Europe. It is, for example, it's a more global kind of thing. There's more people there from all over the world. You go from common law of the UK to the Constitution of the US to the smart contract of the blockchain. You just get more precise about what you're doing, right? So it's both more capitalist and more inclusive. So
it's like a new frontier kind of.
It's a new frontier, right? So it kind of, if you think, it's like V3, right? And one way to think.
Wait, what's V3?
Just the third version.
Version 3.
Okay.
Yeah, version 3.0.
I thought it was like,
No, it's, that's right. So it's not a podcast abbreviation. That's right. So, one way of thinking about that, I mentioned this, and it's something that most people don't have what we would call priced in, right? What is not priced in, for example, is the fact that the majority of English speakers online in the next 10 years or so are going to be Indian. Why? Because about 1 billion something Indians have just gotten online, and many Indians speak English, and many more are quickly learning English due to being online.
And Indians crush it.
Well, there's some Indians who are quite good. Not all, some are quite good. But the thing is that internet, unlike the Chinese internet, is not air-gapped from the American internet. The Chinese internet is its own world, right? Like, because of the Great Firewall, they've got a Galapagos Islands ecosystem where they've got different versions of everything, and things are, you've got fish with feathers. Everything is like remixed.
All their own apps that are essentially like the apps we use, but just specifically like
yes, though
like
it is
WeChat and stuff.
Like WeChat, but what's useful? There's a book called AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee. Okay, it came out right before the pandemic. It's now about a few years old, but it'll give you a snapshot of this sort of Galapagos Islands ecosystem, where, for example, one of the biggest companies in China is like the Chinese version of Groupon. It's called Meituan, but it did a lot more. Imagine if Groupon executed extremely well. Right? Nothing against Groupon, but the American version did only like so. The Chinese version had like amazing will to power CEOs and or CEO and did extremely well.
That wasn't just like a deal better.
It wasn't just deal better. They do a lot of other stuff, right?
Were they before Groupon or after?
I think they were at first a Groupon clone, but now they far
Groupon had
exceeded
like the
them.
most insane hype at the time. Everybody's like, "What is this thing?" And now it's like, "Yeah, I get $5 off of sandwich."
Some Broadway show I didn't even really want to go to.
But the thing
and you
is,
couldn't even cash it in anymore.
well, what's interesting though, Andrew Mason's original. Look, it's hard to build a business and so on, and the fact that he got it to public is good. But yes, there was a huge amount of hype about it 10 years ago. But the entire concept of crowdfunding, having a crowdfunded deal tip over if you have enough collective action online. Andrew Mason had started the thing as The Point, which was like this attempt to try to get people to cooperate online to do something together. What we found was that it was easiest to cooperate to get them to buy something at that time.
Gotcha.
That was like 10, 12 years ago. Perhaps you might be able to get them to cooperate to do something of more significance now today, 10, 12 years later, when there's a lot more tools that are being developed, So, but to your point, right? So yes, I'm not that bullish on the particular state as a guarantor of those values, but I am bullish on those values. So how do we actually work around that? How do we actually preserve some sort of global rule of law? One way I put it, I had this article that came out in Foreign Policy a few months ago, and it's like, the U.S. is less and less a guarantor of the rules-based order. China doesn't even pretend to be. It is essentially just it's self-interested for the Han. You can do a deal.
Yeah,
with
they're
them.
almost like kind of similar, but one's like, yeah, that's the deal, and the other's like, no, we're not like that.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I talked about how there's this weird convergence of the two things. In China they call it human flesh search, and here we call it cancellation. Okay,
they call that's what they call it there.
Yeah, translate. Just think about what that sounds like. Right?
Do they call it human flesh search culture?
Well, no.
Oh, look at these comedians talking about human flesh search culture again.
Yeah, so human flesh search, basically, it's a very evocative term. It's like, there's this guy online, he said something wrong, and so then these.
When he went to Amsterdam, he said he was doing a bit of a human flesh.
Well, okay, sure. So this is a different version. So this is like. This is the unfun version, I guess. So basically they find somebody saying something bad online, and then all of these Chinese netizens, their equivalent of 4chan, just goes and trawls through to find who this person is, where they are. It's like pawing through all of the flesh of all the humans to find that one person who said some thought crime, and then the whole internet piles on them, right?
That's what happened to Uncle Roger.
Yeah, I guess so.
Lots of people. I'm
yeah,
sure.
this comedian who was on our show, but the same thing happened. He said something about off color about Taiwan, like a joke or something.
Oh
and
yeah,
like,
yeah.
And like he had a whole PR fiasco and.
Right, exactly. So there's analogs of all this stuff on the Chinese internet, but it's often like the inverse. For example, you're not criticized for being too nationalist, but not for not being nationalist enough. Okay.
Yeah,
so
of course.
They have in their own way gone to this ultra right ethnic nationalist level since Xi Jinping took office. Just to quantify this because it's less visible to us, being outside, on the order of 90% of like governors and so on in China were like replaced, like the Politburo, the Standing Committee. There's various facts and figures. I'll probably like tweet afterwards to get the exact numbers, but something that, if I recall correctly, like 57 out of 63 of a particular group were replaced by Xi Jinping going into like 2017.
Cleaned house,
right?
It's like sports.
Well, yeah, so about like 90% of people were just like replaced like this. And then you started really seeing the change in attitude where the sort of more quiet internationalist capitalist attitude of the, Deng, Jiang, Hu era, those are like the three leaders of China prior to Xi Jinping. That kind of sort of quieter, multilateralist, like we're just making stuff and selling it to the world, hide your strength and bide your time. That all gone now. So-called wolf warrior diplomacy, where they're just very aggressive. Wolf warrior is like the Chinese Rambo. Okay, it's become very popular over there. And
so China has like their like big movie that's like a Rambo.
Wolf Warrior 2. If you've never seen it,
and he's like fighting for China.
Yeah, so go watch it because it is something where it is like Rambo, except it's the Americans that are the bad guy.
Oh, you know what? I saw a preview of it because it's like the biggest movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing is, America's the bad guy.
Yeah.
They're fighting against America.
I love that guy as a dad that's like Frank Stallone. Like it's like exactly the same.
Yeah, so like Wolf Warrior 2 or more recently the Battle of Lake Changjin, right?
That's the one I saw, yeah.
Okay, right. So both of those were like, I think, number one in the Chinese box office. I think Battle of Lake Changjin is now number one globally. Even as Hollywood is sort of tanking, China has sort of taken over many aspects of 20th century America. It's got a gigantic, probably the single largest market, all those kinds of things. And it basically shows, again, this all of the Hollywood, techniques, but, the ominous music plays on top of, the American military.
Yeah.
Okay. It is disorienting.
I mean, that's how like a lot of people here would probably like to make American movies too.
Yeah, but that's true. Except the difference is, I feel that when they're made in the U.S., there's also an American good guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's the activist or what have you who stands up to the evil military.
That's
right.
exactly what it is.
That's right.
Stands up to those people storming the Capitol.
Correct. So the problem
puts the rainbow flags on them as a ceremony.
What have you? Okay. Right. Exactly. So. But the problem and solution are both coming from within the house. So therefore, it's like, it's one thing. But when you see it just totally overseas, it's quite a different. That is a different hierarchy, a different tribe versus this tribe.
Like old school America.
Well, yeah, okay, right. So now the thing is, it's worth watching this because it's just getting a sense, a temperature check on where other cultures are at, right?
Yeah.
And this is something which is I find it interesting because, I mean, for example, most people don't know how China got rich. Do you know how China got rich? Or richer?
Manufacturing?
iPhones?
Well, so that's part of it, right? But like, I mean, they were communist.
Yeah.
What happened?
They like opened up the markets.
But what exactly, like?
No, I don't know. I just thought they kind of...
I think it was like a lot of like bootleg DVDs to start.
Sure. So what happened was Deng Xiaoping, who was a communist revolutionary also, but he was purged multiple times, managed to win power in what was effectively a coup in the mid-1970s. He took over and, without changing the brand of communism, started doing things that were these so-called special economic zones, starting with one across the causeway from Hong Kong called Shenzhen. That worked, and he called it communism even though it was capitalism, okay? And that grew like a weed, and so then he started cloning it across the east coast of China, and more special economic zones cropped up, and eventually he was able to essentially turn around the country, and he took over. He took power at like, I think, age 78, and most people thought he was going to die like soon, but he managed to run it until like his 90s. Oh, wow. And then he transitioned power in the early 90s over to Jiang Zemin, And then that like began. So he was like a startup founder at age 78.
Right.
Okay. Which is, I mean, just think about the stress of running China. Okay. Now, there's lots of criticism one can make of Deng. I think Ezra Vogel's biography is probably, one of the best on this. But it is, there's also, if you want to, just a quick article, NPR has this article, and it's called The Secret Document That Transformed China. One thing that people don't get is, when you talk about what communism was, capitalism was punishable by death. Okay, just to give you a sense, before Deng, became the...
And then he made it like, we're basically going to do it, but we're going to call it the old thing.
Exactly. He had the saying, very famous saying, black cat, white cat, doesn't matter if it catches mice. But before Deng, there's a province called Xiaogang, and there are a bunch of farmers there. And, communism was interpreted in not just in China but other places to mean that there wasn't even any personal property or anything. The teeth in your head, they belonged to the collective. Okay, so all these farmers, they were like on basically just starving. But if they kept any grain for themselves, then the guy, the commissar who's overlooking that district would notice, right? So what these guys did is they did something.
Worst.
Yeah, it's terrible, right?
That would be the worst.
So these guys these
They
farmers
come in and you're like looking extra chubby and you're like nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So essentially what these guys did, these farmers, they signed a secret contract, which was itself, contracts were illegal. Okay. They signed a secret contract that basically said, okay, look, we're all going to take some of the grain that we make this time. And if we are killed for this, then the ones who are not killed will take care of our children. Okay, that was the level.
Wow.
Basic profit sharing and a contract was so taboo in China that they like signed this secret document and hid it in their roof. Okay, and so what happened once they had this agreement, all these guys, once they could keep some of what they earned, wow, they had a gigantic bumper harvest. So of course the authorities were like, you seem to have a lot of grain nowadays.
Yeah.
And so they were going to get killed, but Deng raised up his hand and was like, okay, no, we're doing the new communism this time, right? It's capitalism now, we call it communism, right?
Yeah.
But that's like the reason that story is kind of important to know is just like how insane this stuff got, right? And importantly, the Red Terror, the excesses of communism in the Soviet Union happened in the 1910s, 1930s, right? But there was like a lag, and it became like insane in China within living memory. In the 1960s, 1970s, you had the Great Leap Forward. You had 1950s, Great Leap Forward. 1960s and 70s, the Cultural Revolution. So within living memory, this thing that had sort of burned its way out through the population of the Soviet Union, which had settled into sort of this Brezhnev, like it wasn't as murderous, was just like carving a swath through China in the 60s and 70s. It's still very live. Probably people listening to this podcast were alive when people were being killed for capitalism in China. Okay. Now, from that to Chinese tech billionaires in one generation is so insane.
Yeah, that's wild.
That you have to sort of understand what kind of turnaround happened in their society. Just to understand like how much of a head of steam they have. They feel highly motivated and what have you.
And they're cooking
Like they're trying to catch up.
Well, they're trying to catch up. They also,
or take over.
For example, yeah. So there's aspects of U.S. history that other people would consider very obscure that are now about 1619 or something like that. Okay, other cultures pick through. There's about 100 billion people who've ever lived. Okay, so you can pick through 100 billion lifetimes to find those things that kind of support your case. And so what's big in China? The Opium Wars. Do you know what the Opium Wars were?
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, like, whether it's the British or actually the Americans were allied with them at one point, this is called Eight Nations Alliance, to essentially fight to deal drugs in China for profit and like addict the population to it. So.
And it's pretty easy to paint that as like the bad guys were coming in to try to get everyone addicted to drugs.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so essentially this stuff, which is not stressed in the West, is big over there, really big, right?
Where it's like some tiny thing that you kind of hear about here.
It's a footnote in a history book here, but it's like a huge front page daily.
Even still.
Because
like they have like We Remember shirts, like kind of thing.
It's politically useful, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so I talk about a lot of this in the book, which is essentially, you will essentially each regime will have propaganda that is useful to it that is not useful to the other side, right? And so it's not so much usually, sometimes what they say is false, sometimes what they say is true, it's just not useful to the side, so it doesn't even acknowledge it, right? And so while they're big on the Opium Wars, they don't really talk too much about Mao and the Great Leap Forward and all that stuff. They'll say Mao was 7 parts good and 3 parts bad. Why? Well, at least he unified the country and he kicked out the Japanese. Okay, and he's good for that, right? he didn't have to do it quite that way. There were many other problems with that, but that's our
It's very sugar-coated.
Very sugar-coated, extremely
They
sugar-coated.
killed
right?
a few people.
But what's
everyone's gonna kill a few people.
What's interesting about it, exactly, right? So what's interesting about it is there's actually three very different groups that are all invested in that idea that China is, quote, communist. The first is the Chinese Communist Party itself, right, which wants to maintain that Deng's coup in the 1970s was like continuous, right, that it was still the same thing, right? The second are many Republicans who want to say, oh, the Chinese Communist Party, right? And the third are many tankies who project onto China.
Look how good it's going.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, whereas really what they are is ultranationalist. They do use communist-y stuff. They are doing like the so-called common prosperity doctrine where they're going after lots of rich guys. And stuff. But
yeah, that's like the Alibaba guy and stuff.
Yeah.
Wasn't it that he had all these opinions and then like he disappeared for 2 months
He
and he came back and he was like,
got a little too big for his britches.
That's right. So
one
way, exactly. So one way of thinking about it is communism is whatever the Chinese Communist Party says it is. Okay, and what that means is basically. They're at the center of a network, and you could be, it could be Xinjiang, it could be Taiwan, it could be Hong Kong, it could be Falun Gong, which is like a religious movement. It could be the tech, libertarianish capitalists of Jack Ma. It could be, Bo Xili, who's an ultra Maoist, and so on and so forth. There's various kinds of deviations from their center of opinion. Some are to the left, some are to the right, some are to the libertarian, right? Doesn't matter. Anything that deviates too far is not communist. Communism is whatever the Chinese Communist Party says it is.
So what's the center of opinion in like North America?
Democracy is whatever the American Democrat Party says it is.
I think I heard you say so.
Yes.
Because what's so funny? Because that was like one of the questions that kept I kept asking people and no one had a good answer because I was like, I always hear people say they're against democracy and I'm like, I don't get what that means because everything they say, it's like stuff they do too. It's like, they're just like, I guess use like Trump, the election thing, but it's like they did this. I don't get it.
Okay. So let's take it. Let's start with different words and then come back to this one, right? Something like Christianity or communism or capitalism or democracy is such a capacious word that it can contain both X and its opposite. For example, right? Christianity originally, the original Christianity around the time of the Romans was a slave revolt that tore down the empire. Later, that same word Christianity was used to basically justify the so-called Holy Roman Empire, which styled itself as successor to the Roman Empire, and it was like a Christian fusion, right? The concept of a Christian king was sort of oxymoronic, at least for the early Christians, right? Like this was like a slave revolt, basically, right? And, when you think about communism also has meant both killing all the capitalists and capitalists joining the Communist Party more recently, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about capitalism itself, think about what, 1800s agrarian capitalism versus 1900s industrial capitalism versus, 2000s technological capitalism. I mean, it's not quite the opposite, but it's very different, right?
Yeah.
The kinds of things,
of
how you're counting, right?
Or like the tech version now versus
the tech version, exactly. That's what I mean. So the technological capitalism of today in the 2000s, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So in the same way, like democracy means many different things. For example, one thing that you can do if you go to Google Ngrams or Google Books actually, and there's a thing where you can type in and look at old words. I think it's Ngrams or Google Books, right? I think it's Google Ngrams. You can type in republic, democracy. And what you'll see is republic, people used to refer to the U.S. as a republic, and that's like declined.
It's more of like a Twitter thing that people say to argue now.
Well, so what you're going to get probably, in my view, you're going to get the Republicans starting to say our republic. And
I will actually, now that you say that, I do notice there's more people on the right who refer to it as a republic.
Exactly.
Almost
as like a correction, because they're always like, this is a democracy, and they're like, it's not.
Well,
it's not supposed
and
to
to show what side they're on, I think, like almost verbally, it's like the patriot thing. Only right-wing people call themselves patriots on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
People on the left do never refer to themselves as patriots, even though they might be patriotic.
Sometimes, like, politicians will say, like, if you were an actual patriot, you would do this.
Yes, yes, and that's like this sort of double reversal where you try to use the other guy's language on them. But and by the way, on this, like, I think of Democrat Republican as becoming like Sunni versus Shiite. So I don't want any part of it.
Yeah,
I just want to
like
be
the best theory.
Well, it's actually, so let me actually put some meat on those bones, right? Something like 96% of Democrats are not married to Republicans. Okay. And if you look there, if you Google, for example, Vox actually has a link. Google Vox, Democrat Republican network diagram polarization. I think 2011. Okay, and what you'll see, you might put this in the show notes or afterwards, is a relatively unified, roughly bipartisan Congress in the 1940s that pulls apart gradually into two groups that only vote with each other. It's straight party line votes over and over again. The only, bipartisan votes are for like bailouts or bombings or things like that. Okay, which are when they do something both stupid and evil, it's bipartisan. If you've heard that term, right? And so the leadership is pulling into really two different groups. And there's a CJR 2017 article. It's like Breitbart Change Right-Wing Media Ecosystem that shows a similar diagram, not at the level of Congress, but the level of the population. Again, at the network level, you can see red and blue becoming literally separate networks, right? Now, what that means is it's not one nation under God, indivisible. It's two nations, the Democrat and Republican nations.
I will say that, I do see in real life a lot of people where, the dude's sort of a little more right wing and the girl's sort of more a little liberal, and it seems to work.
Yeah, but if you look, at least if you look at the numbers on this,
who they actually vote for,
when they marry,
more about the cities.
Yeah, exactly. It's becoming tribal, right? It's literally becoming something where ideology becomes biology in one generation. Meaning, basically, it's like Protestant Catholic, it's like Sunni Shiite. This is not something. If you look at all the graphs,
just like any other one.
Yeah, exactly. It's becoming two ethnic groups. Like Republicans marry Republicans and Democrats marry Democrats.
And they live in these different places.
That's the sort that's happening, right?
That's when people are talking about the divorce, the
national divorce.
National divorce.
Exactly. So divorce has already happened in the cloud. We're seeing it start to materialize on the land.
Basically like Twitter and Truth Social.
Yeah, right, exactly. So exactly, in the cloud, you already have these social networks. You start to have apps that are right-coded, apps and podcasts and stuff that are left-coded, because you have foundational premises that divide these worldviews, And then you're starting to get them physically sorting.
Yeah, because every argument just gets back to the original argument that you disagree on.
Exactly, that's right. And so, the thing about this is, what's interesting is one way you can show that's really just tribes is during COVID, Democrats and Republicans switched sides several times. At first it was extremely, right-coded to think, the coronavirus could be an issue because, and the left
was a huge switch, actually. Yeah,
it's a huge switch, right? You can't explain this by some reference to kind of immutable right and left. At first, it was something where the China virus was a huge deal, and it was racist to talk about the China virus. Then switched sides, and then Trump was saying, we need to slow down the testing. This is not a big deal, et cetera. And the left was saying, oh my God, we need to test more, et cetera. Total switch from.
And it's just to oppose him, do you think?
Just to oppose him.
Is it just to
both to oppose each other? Both to oppose each other.
And you kind of predicted
I don't even want to get yes.
He's always right about everything.
Well, I'm not always. Some of my investments work, some of them don't. That's how I kind of record them. But I do think I got this one correct mostly. Then what happened is Trump came out in favor of vaccines, and then Kamala Harris and others said that they would potentially not take a Trump vaccine because it'd been rushed through.
So many people said that.
So she said that during a debate.
Yeah, during a debate.
Yeah,
and then it flipped again, where now the right is anti-vax, and some of them are skeptical of the germ theory of disease, and the left wanted masks for 4-year-olds forever or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so it is not necessarily that both sides have a piece of the truth. It could be that both sides are actually gone in some ways, and you just kind of be okay, just let them slug it out,
So is that what you see, as an individual, you're just why, unless it why get involved in this fight that's just going to go on forever?
The thing is, when we read
if you really believe in one of the things, maybe
that's right. So when you read about other societies in space and time, do you want to get in the middle of the Protestants and Catholics when they're arguing over whether the wafer is the body of Christ or not, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to get in the middle of that, right? Slug it out, good luck, right? May the best man win, and just basically be away from that. Same with Sunni Shiite. Do you want to be in the middle of the Iran-Iraq conflict?
And his girlfriend arguing over a piece of cake.
Or something, yeah, exactly.
Something like that. Yeah. But do you think that there's some people who will essentially say it must be nice to not have to be able to sit on the sidelines, because for them they go, this is real world.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing. First is the folks who say that are usually those are the folks who are usually also complaining about white privilege. They tend to be the most privileged whites.
Yes.
So to speak,
absolutely.
Right? And so it's like Barnard, bam. You could just be okay, which private school? Sidley? Okay, which one did you go?
But also anytime. Anyone, I feel when you're trying to do anything moving forward, at least in your own life. Anyone that starts being like, oh, I would do that, but I have like some moral. You're just like, those are the people that tune out immediately.
There's an immediate counter argument to that, by the way. And you know the game of slaps in New York, like you know, you go like this, on top of each other, right? So what they're trying to do is you're putting forth an argument, and they're asserting a dominance move. They're trying to say you're a bad person, right? They're not arguing true false. They're saying you're bad. Oh, it must be nice to be so privileged that you don't have to be concerned about this. And then. So, you know, you can try arguing true false, but you have to actually go back with they're a bad person. Well, actually, the rest of the world doesn't want to get involved in another white on white war. So white on white violence, why don't you guys get and all these other poor people around the world can go and build up their own economies, right? And, you know, so the thing is that somebody like that, essentially they're like, they don't even realize how aggressive they're being necessarily verbally. What they're trying to do is insult you and gain status, and you just can't let that, you just have to do it back.
I always feel like, too, I think that's exactly right. And then also you're like sort of like a casualty to their agenda. Like you're not even on the same wavelength. It's just like you're trying to do something and it's just like a little bit in the way for them, sort of. You know what I mean? It's like so... You should not don't even like these people are irrelevant.
They're actually very a good way to think about it. We know the term greedy, right? These people are very status greedy. Okay, they want to always have the highest status in any interaction. They're not willing to just engage with you as a peer and so on. They want to assert a dominance move of you're a sinner somehow. Oh, and they've got a practice repertoire really of sort of verbal tools, scalpels and hammers and so on, right? That actually were kind of developed in academia to win various kinds of faculty lounge battles. Okay?
Nerd battles.
Yeah, exactly. So all of these battles in like humanities, you know, departments and so on, those weapons spilled out onto Twitter.
They work a little less
now, especially like it's like the debating stuff. Like the amount of people who you go on Twitter and just the average person on Twitter just knows every, you know, like Latin debating term, and you're like, why do you all know this?
Right, exactly, because it's mimetic, right?
Yeah.
You know, in fact, actually, I had this. Hold on, I'm just gonna read this tweet to you just because it kind of illustrates something. Hold on. My dude, bad take. This ain't it, Chief. Read the room and do better. I know you hope she sees this, bro, but as a haver of good opinions, you're posting cringe. So stop licking dem boots, log off, touch grass, and delete your account.
Yeah, okay? It's like all of them in just one.
It's all of them in just one, right? And so the thing about this is, I posted this.
That's how I tweet.
Yeah. So the thing is, once you kind of post them all together, right? And, you know, people at first didn't get that it was parodic. Because it was really like 11 cliches or whatever.
Parodic?
Like a parody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was like 11 cliches like back to back, right?
Yeah.
And what I call this down talk, you know? It's like this condescending tone.
Yikes. You missed yikes.
Yikes.
Big
yes.
yikes.
Big yikes.
Big yikes.
You know, that's a quiet part out loud. Stay in your lane. Not a good look. Take the L. Ratio.
It's a person that was like a doll that you pull the thing and it only has like 11 phrases that can come out.
Yeah.
That's right. So basically it's like GPT-3. Do you know what that is? It's like a AI thing.
Yeah, the AI, similar like
it's like a chatbot.
Yeah, the chatbot. Right.
That's right. So if you take not a good look, take the L in ratio, you can combine that into not a good look, man. Take the L already. You're getting ratioed. It's like an algebra of put downs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that going to be a shirt available in your merch store?
Something. Well, the thing is, what I do is when you distill all of that, right, and when you can put it all together and you can see, because they're all like spread out. Or all
so what happens? Yeah.
Yeah, you realize that that's almost like people learning words that they're repeating. Somebody came up with that, and it was like a little verbal knife for close quarters combat that fits in the 140 or 280 character environment of Twitter. And so because that little verbal knife kind of works there, it's like copied and cloned, this digital knife that you can just stab.
Like in a video game.
It's like a karate. It's like a karate move.
It's like a karate move. That's exactly right. So it's like a verbal like this, right? But then you can often go meta and you can actually block, grab, like Neo in the Matrix, right? You can turn that knife into just digital bits by just quoting like 50 of them, and then that person, it's clear that they're like cliche.
It'd
right?
be like a movie where like the villain, they just had to show a mirror to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And
right.
Like they'd go to dust.
So in the same way, those are like the dumb versions, right? The smarter versions are check your privilege, toxic masculinity, all that type of stuff. Those smarter
higher stakes.
Yeah, they're higher stakes because they have a bunch of theory behind them. And all of that theory delegitimizes the target on the other side. It's like, is academia, there's all these papers and stuff behind it. Because, using a phrase like that is bringing in reinforcements, right?
Yeah.
They're citing effectively scripture to say why you are a sinner and why they should have higher status than you, right? Go ahead.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, so all that like, yeah, that's like such an accurate description of like kind of how the internet culture works or whatever. And then, so you're kind of saying if you're like a person, all this is happening, and obviously, yeah, you want to have like some tools to like defend yourself and like argue against it and whatever, especially in your personal life, probably. But like, then you see that as like a thing that's not going away, and it's kind of just generally like eating at the foundation of America. And then what actually happens is this kind of like after America thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So basically, people have, I mean, part of that whole thing that we're describing, it predated social media, by the way. People blame it all on social media and so on. But that dynamic predated social media. There was cable news, there's other stuff. In many ways, you can trace it all the way back to, there's a gigantic centralization arc up to 1950, and now we're in the middle of a huge decentralization arc that's happening even faster than the centralization. So you go, railroads and mass media and mass production and the age of the factory where like everything is choke pointed through General Motors and General Mills and General Electric, right? That's like the mid 20th century. One telephone company, AT&T, and two superpowers, US and USSR, and three television stations. Everything's choke pointed in 1950 something, and then it starts all breaking apart as you go from the transistor, cable news, the personal computer, the internet, the smartphone, cryptocurrency. It just starts disintegrating and decentralizing, And what's happened, though, is all of these institutions that were built for this giant centralizing era are not built for this era, so they're just flailing, They're massively overbuilt for what it is that we're in, And at least a lot of the Western institutions. So the question is then, what does the other side look like, right? And I think many ways you can't turn back the hands of the clock in a normal sense, but you can turn them all the way around. You can just turn it all ding, and then you start something new. And so the book, The Network State, what it's about is fundamentally finding your community online, okay? I'll give the short version, then I'll give the long version. Finding your community online, a highly aligned online community, organizing them to first do online things and then do a very important offline thing, which is crowdfunding territory to live together with, right? That territory doesn't all have to be in one place, importantly. It could be even two people in a group house, okay? Or it's a small group house, but you know what I mean? Like two people in an apartment, or 10 people in a group house, or 30 people getting like a cul-de-sac of houses next to each other. Those pockets around the world, you start coalescing from a bunch of atomized nodes in the cloud to start being little pockets around on the earth. Go ahead.
No, the one thing that actually I felt like I didn't get is because if you like think of how that sort of starts to play out, and you have these communities, and you're like, what if you bought land? What if you had a thing?
Yep.
And that I could see how that could be it. But then I guess the other part is like, wouldn't like the countries just say, well, you're not a part of that country,
Sure.
or part of this country, and you have to pay tax. Like when people try seasteading or like things like that.
And people can't just move to any country they want if that like location happens to be.
So,
Also, what are the percentage odds that those just, or how many of them at least just turn into like cults where there's the one guy at the top having sex with everybody else? And
if there's like a million, if there's like, I guess it depends.
yeah,
how
I guess
big
if
they
there's
are,
how many of them.
Yeah.
I'm sure that if there was a country, like a little island with like
So-
50 people, then maybe it would be like that too, right?
You're going to see.
What does the government do? Like, wouldn't they just say like, yeah, this whole thing's not happening?
Yeah. So right. So several
visas canceled, got to go home.
totally. So first of all, the cult kind of thing is usually a group that's like isolated from the world. A cult does not want to talk to the rest of the world, and so on and so forth, right?
sense.
This is more like, actually the early Americas were settled by lots of groups that wanted to be an example to the world, right? That's a huge difference, to be an example to the world. For example, like the Oneida Commune that was started in like northern New York, or if you think about Pennsylvania, William Penn's community, the Puritans, there were a bunch of, groups that went and settled the Midwest, and they were all essentially either religious or purpose-driven communities, okay? And they just recruited people there, and they wanted to build what they saw of as the better life and serve as an example to others, okay?
Okay.
So that is actually how America was built in the 1800s. There's a good book by Charles Nordhoff called Communistic Societies of the United States. Back in the 1800s, at that time, communistic did not mean communism. Like the
like
word
commune.
It meant a commune.
Like
it meant
kibbutz or something.
Yeah, it was voluntary and opt-in. That's a key thing, right? As opposed to just take all the money. It was collective, but it was a voluntary collective. Very important.
So I guess maybe to start, you would have to just still pay the tax in this, but you're part of this other thing too.
Right, exactly. So essentially, the thing is, there's a whole spectrum of levels of sovereignty.
Maybe your tax on the one could be tax deductible.
Yeah. So right. So now let's talk about this for a second. So basically, with the with respect to cryptocurrency first, let's do that first, and then let's come to this.
Okay.
With cryptocurrency, there are crypto and fiat exchanges, right? You can have Bitcoin, you can sell it for US dollars, and vice versa, Ethereum for, yen, all these different cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies around the world. And the existence of cryptocurrency does not mean, or it has not meant, that fiat law completely goes away, right? Nor that fiat currency completely goes away. There is an interface between them, which is complicated, and it varies in different countries. There's regulations like KYC, all this stuff. There's countries that have tried to ban it. There's countries that have now started to embrace it. There's states like Wyoming, which have allowed you to now incorporate on-chain using Ethereum. There's states like El Salvador that have adopted Bitcoin. So there's a spectrum of responses by legacy states, as well as ways that you can take this new system and start docking it to the old system. And over time, the old system, if it can't ban the new system, which it can't for various reasons that I'll get into, or at least it's hard for it to, because this is decentralized and there's people from around the world who believe in it, and it's built to be hard to ban. If the old system can't ban the new system, there's parts of it, or at least if all of it can't ban it, China might be able to ban it, other countries can't, then it starts sort of seeing some of the merit, bending to, flexing with, integrating with, or being transformed by the new system. Okay, that we're in the middle of now. We're about 10 years into that, right? We're about 20, 30 years into the internet. All the politicians are on the internet now. Have we noticed?
Yeah.
Every government website is on the internet. The internet, the
They're
news
all
system.
on True Social.
Yeah, well, or whatever, right? Yeah, exactly.
The ones we follow are anyways.
Fine, right? Yeah, so or Twitter or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so the news system, the internet, which was poo-pooed and dismissed, and Twitter is this totally ludicrous thing of tweeting your breakfast, and now every single politician in the entire world knows the importance of Twitter, right? That was 15 years. Okay, 15 years for
Yeah,
this.
I guess that's true.
It's not that long, right?
So it's the same thing again.
Well, right. So now if you talk about not cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies, but crypto countries and fiat countries, what does that exchange, what does that surface look like, right? And the surface looks complicated. Why? Because your crypto country, if it has 100,000 people, I've got a visual on my website. If you go to the network state in one image, 100,000 people, they could have piling up all over the world, right? You have this group over here, it's like a town of 1,000. Here's a group house of 50. You have little clusters and, all around the world. Some of them are in South America, some of them are in the Pacific Islands, et cetera, okay? And so let's say you're in 100 legacy countries.
How do you get recognized as a country?
I'm coming to that. Yes. Okay. So you have 100,000 people. They're spread over, let's say, 100 legacy countries, right? So first of all, you don't just have 4 directions to expand. You have 400 because you can go north, east, south, and west on all 100 of these clusters, okay? Just like Google's offices. Google has offices all around the world. You walk in, it's a piece of Google. You swipe a card, you can see it, right?
It's like an embassy.
Yeah, it's like an embassy. Starbucks, all around the world. You're in the same place in different places.
Right.
Right? We take that for granted.
That's true.
Right? So is that
there is probably countries where there's like a thing dividing the.
Yes.
Alaska. What's the
Like,
difference?
or
Alaska,
Korea.
Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
Hawaii is 2,000 miles away from the United continental U.S., but we think of it as the same place because the people there think of themselves as part of the U.S. and the people in the U.S. think of Hawaii as part of it.
Yeah.
So really, it's that software installed in people's heads that merges them, as well as people outside say, okay, that's U.S. territory versus not, right? So it's really just writing the right bits to people's heads that turn these borders real.
And you
okay?
are more connected with the people in your online networks in a lot of ways than you are your neighbor.
With those neighbors, exactly,
Yeah,
right?
whatever.
Okay, so now, Indonesia, for example, if you've ever seen a map of Indonesia, lots of islands separated by ocean, okay, but they're the same country, okay. What if you have lots of islands separated by internet?
Yeah.
Now they can be the same country. At least think of themselves as such. Of course, for the first 1 or 5 or 10 or whatever years, they'll be made fun of. Everybody will laugh at them, right?
But and is it the UN or something that says like, okay, fine, you're a country?
I don't think the
how
UN
do you
as a
apply
whole-
to be a country?
Yes.
Because once you apply to be a country, I guess
Great
you could
question.
leave this. Like I moved to America, like I could be like,
Yeah.
I'm not a resident of America. I'm a resident.
Isn't that
of
the
this
whole
place.
sovereign citizens thing?
Well,
where you
so
always watch
sovereign
people get
citizens is
tased?
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
They always get tased.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's
Every video of a sovereign
Yes.
citizen is just them getting tased.
That's right.
At a courthouse.
Because a citizen can't be sovereign, right?
Right.
You need a collective to be sovereign, right? You and what army equals you and what country.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
That's a fundamental. So, the thing is, I think to caricature, the progressive doesn't get the concept of starting new countries, but the libertarian doesn't get why you need diplomatic recognition. You kind of need both. You need both the individual and the collective, and you need to fuse them in an interesting way, right? this is, crypto has also done this. Crypto has made progressives more libertarian and libertarians more progressive. Why progressives more libertarian? Well, you can start new currencies. This is a big thing. It's like an undeniable movement. Conversely, it makes libertarians more progressive because if you start any kind of crypto thing, you'll immediately realize, well, I need some kind of identity verification. I need some anti-fraud. I need to rebuild something that looks much like a state. Even if it's a V2 and it's an improvement on it, I need to rebuild certain of the aspects of the old world, right? So, in the best case, both parties kind of learn something from that. The old guy, the old world learns that the new world is possible. The new world realizes why the old world had certain things their way, right? Sometimes you can only learn it by trying it yourself. Okay. I still think progress happens. I don't think you come all the way full circle. I think it's more like a helix where you go up a level. It's cyclical on the X and Y plane, but the Z axis, you're going up. Okay. But coming back to the sovereignty thing, first let me give some precedents. Okay. Tuvalu. .tv domain did a deal with GoDaddy. If you've ever registered something.tv, that Tuvalu is getting some money. Okay.
The country?
The country.
Yeah. I've never even heard that country, but I remember the .tv thing. That was a country.
Yes.
Yeah.
Colombia. Probably heard of Colombia. .co domain. They get some money for that. Okay. That's a deal that a country did with a company. Okay. Where it's like it's digital property. It's .co is generating revenue for it. It's TLD. It's got the rights to do that. Nevada did a deal with Elon Musk for the Gigafactory. Okay. El Salvador has listed Bitcoin or recognized Bitcoin as a sovereign currency. Wyoming has recognized Ethereum-based companies, so-called DAOs, or not companies.
I have one of the city DAO.
Okay,
lots of land.
Awesome. All right, so like
deeds or whatever.
That's right. So just like countries have put their some of their processes online, now they're starting to put some sovereigns are starting to put some of their processes on chain. Right? Both currencies and incorporation stuff. So those are examples. I just gave several examples of, quote, diplomatic recognition between a state or a country and a company or a currency, right? So it is not unprecedented. This has happened. These kinds of deals have happened. There's more I can rattle off. For example, Boeing in South Carolina, for example, or Amazon HQ2, right? Not that these are without controversy, but
Disney World's almost like its own
Disney World was
country.
like this, and they had conflict with DeSantis and so on and so forth on this, right? So the thing is that once you realize, okay, these kinds of deals are possible between cloud and land entities, right? Between companies and currencies and communities over here and cities and states and countries over here, right? Given that those deals are possible, that's like the crypto fiat exchange. That concept goes from just cryptocurrency and fiat currency to general interface between cloud entities and land entities.
Right.
Okay. And that actually now how does that brass tacks how does that happen here? Okay, so you have this community, as I mentioned. You've got 100,000 people worldwide. They're spread out over 100 legacy countries, fiat countries. Okay, and what happens is you've got effectively dual citizens everywhere, right? They're a citizen of
but they're only a resident. Oh yeah, I guess it depends on where you're a resident of.
Right, they're a citizen they're a citizen of, let's say, Fiji or El Salvador or the U.S. or what have you, but they're a netizen of this
netizen,
right? Of this proto network state, right? And so the thing is,
like I'm a netizen of like the Pornhub country.
Well, yeah. So some you'd be proud of, maybe some not so much.
I'm a.
It'd be like one of those ones where you go, yeah, don't put a stamp in that passport.
Yeah, maybe whatever.
But
okay,
I'm actually a netizen of Forjanistan.
Something like that. Okay, so you're a citizen of X and you're a netizen of Y, just like you've got fiat currency and cryptocurrency. You have a fiat passport and a crypto passport. Now, at first, these are like parallel systems, right? The crypto passport is not recognized offline. It's just some losers LARPing, whatever, right? If you can build the number of simultaneous LARPers into something that's not just one person or 10 or 100 or 1,000, but 10 or 100,000, and doing so over a long period of time, well, here's what things are interesting. Do you know how many countries in the UN are less than 100,000 people in size?
Oh, no, but I would guess
Okay,
probably
17.
It's about 12.
Oh,
pretty good. It's pretty good, right? How many are between 100,000 and a million?
Probably 50?
It's about 26,
okay.
right? So, and then if you say between a million and 10 million, it's like another 60, okay? So most countries are small countries.
Yeah.
Okay? There's only 14 countries in the UN that are over 100 million people.
Okay.
Most people live in big countries, but most countries are actually small countries.
Yeah.
So now, phrased this way, it doesn't seem that hard to build something in the cloud that has the number of people, the amount of land,
the tax base of one of these small places.
Especially
countries. When you're having like big crypto billionaires come in.
Or what have you, right? Exactly. You have talent, though, not just wealth. That's very important.
That was the smartest thing that he that like I resonated so much because you're like the same thing that happened in Canada. It's like everyone just has to leave. Like, you know, so much of like the talent does go outside the industry right now, and that describes like in Canada they leave the country, in entertainment they leave the industry, in like Silicon Valley they're leaving the like mainstream tech industry. Like everything you think of, all of the best people you can think of that are doing the best things are like leaving the like main system.
Well, oftentimes it's. But I was so like Canada. I remember, I don't know exactly when, but they were floating around the notion that they were gonna like take Turks and Caicos, and it was going to become a part of Canada.
Oh, really? I don't remember that.
It was like probably 15 years ago. I don't think it was got far enough, but I think get rid of Quebec. But everybody, like, they were like, we'll have a warm place that we can go.
Wow.
And it'll just be like Hawaii.
union.
It'll just be like Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right? Like exactly what they do with Hawaii, except
Canadian Hawaii.
except not by force. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But so could that theoretically, what you're saying with this nation state, where this cloud-based nation state or network state, would just go and say, hey, we have the resources now. If there's a country that would like to volunteer for this,
yes, but
you
here's
could
the thing.
become this country with the physical. We use your physical.
Oh,
space.
especially if it's like imagine it was like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and you, and like guys like that, and then you go and you're like, yo, Bermuda, we have, or like whatever, like, you know, we have a deal that you can't refuse. We're gonna.
So I think something like that could work, but there's an very important asterisk or edit on that, which is one of the reasons that Bitcoin and Ethereum have the success they do is they have dual citizens in every country. Okay, you have American Bitcoiners, and you have Chinese Bitcoiners, and you have French, and you have Brazilian Ethereumers, and so on and so forth, right? So these are people who are native to that country, who understand that culture, who speak that language, who are friends there, and can argue on behalf of Bitcoin and Ethereum as Brazilians or as Americans or what have you, in the native idiom of their local culture. The fundamental concept is they're dual citizens, okay? This is also the same thing about any network state. Those 100,000 people have subgroups all around the world, right? And so the ideal would be that, let's say you have 1,000 Fijians, okay? People who are in small countries are particularly good to join network states. Why? Because if you have 1,000 Fijians making the case for why Fiji should recognize this network state, that is actually...
I see what you're saying, because you have like, let's say you have like 100,000 people there, and like 60,000 of them are like, yo, we want to have this.
Yeah, exactly. And crucially, if the more of them that are members of the country that you're seeking diplomatic recognition from, the better it will be, because it's not just some rich guys from out of town coming in and plunking down, right?
It's not like Bitcoin imperialism.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. So the thing is, Bitcoin is everywhere and nowhere, and so as such, there's people from all walks of life in all different countries who have identified with it, right? So this is key for diplomatic recognition. Is you need effectively dual citizens, like a citizen/netizen, who is making the case for why this benefits. Now, the thing about diplomatic recognition, by the way, is we don't usually think about it just like, 10 years ago, how much thought did you give to currencies? Not much. It wasn't like a dynamic thing, right? Now, at least everybody in crypto knows that a currency has, 3 properties. It is medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, okay? And in the same way, if the question of the 2010s was what is currency, the question of the 2020s is either what is a country, or even better, what is a nation? Like, what is that unit? Because that thing in the cloud, even before it has any land, is a nation. It's a group of people that think of themselves as a people. That's one way to think
ideologically.
Yeah, ideologically,
similar.
Culturally, exactly. Like the entire concept of nation, by the way.
On the internet, you talk about it all the time, like a community.
A community,
like,
that's right.
Most people probably that's more important to them than whatever else.
Yes, the thing is that a community is like, it is. If you take a community and you put it on steroids, you get a nation. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason is a community could be like, I don't know, a Game of Thrones fan club or something like that. It's a loose affiliation. Okay, we all kind of like the show, something like that, right? Whereas a nation is basically, for example, you've heard the term nation state.
Yeah.
Okay.
Song by Propaganda.
Well, yeah. It's
a song by some punk band.
Oh, okay, yeah. So
yeah, I think
right.
yeah.
So all right. So the term nation state, actually, nation and state are different. Did you guys know what the difference is?
No.
Okay, so the nation, it's like the same root word as natality. It's the people. It is like, for example, the Japanese nation. They have shared language and culture, ethnicity. They're like a group, right?
And the state's the government?
The state's the government. So they're as different as labor and management.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay, so you can have the state over the Japanese people be like America in 1946 was like occupying, Japan after World War II. So there's an American state above the Japanese nation. Okay, this is an old.
So is nation state when they're both the same?
Yeah. So the old concept of the nation state was different ethnic groups should be able to have their own government.
Oh,
that is what it used to mean, right? And that's what gave rise to what we now call France, and we now call Germany, we now call Italy.
France was when they're like gay people should have their own government.
Well, so France actually, the thing is that basically what we now think of as France, most people in what we now think of as France did not speak French before the French Revolution.
Really?
They spoke other languages, like other dialects, things that are kind of adjacent to French. And what happened was the unified government of France installed new software effectively into everybody's brains and just uniformized it.
This has happened.
Here's the curriculum for all schools and just
yes, exactly. So just leveled it out, and there's both good and bad of that. Obviously, these old cultures were kind of like erased. The good was you now had a large unit of people who all spoke the same language, all had the same values because they'd all been educated since early. Okay, they all transact in the same currency. And so then France could go and crush all these folks. So that actually led to German unification, it led to Italian unification. And so this was like the kind of, get big sort of imperative of the 1700s,
and
1800s.
you have that as like a company culture in Silicon Valley probably too, right?
Right, because if these small little groups didn't group up into a nation state, they'd get crushed or they'd be forcibly
or infighting.
Yeah, or infighting, right? So this stopped in a sense civil war because now you had these giant states, but it meant more interstate war because these guys could fight each other, right?
And they're bigger.
And one way of seeing that, there's a UN country called San Marino. It's this tiny thing of 30,000 people that's in what we think of as Italy. And you're like, what is this thing? Why does it exist on the map? And the answer is it sheltered Garibaldi during Italian unification. And so Garibaldi said, okay, I don't have to fold you into all of Italy. You can just kind of be your own thing. So they maintain their sovereignty to the present day. They're like one of the 3 enclaves in the world. The other is like Vatican City and Lesotho.
How many people live there?
30,000 people.
Oh, crazy.
See how small that is?
Yeah.
Right?
Tiny.
So that's tiny. That's like, there's a town on Long Island that's probably bigger than that, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a UN country. So my point is that these UN countries are often, many of them are quite small, much smaller than you might think. They have their status for historical reasons. And so a sufficiently motivated cloud community it'll get told no the first time, the second time, probably the 5th time, the 10th time, right?
Told no when you say they're going to make some sort of formal pitch to the UN?
Well, not to the UN as a whole. So assume the UN as a whole is very slow moving. But any individual country has a list of those other entities that it diplomatically recognizes. Now, the reason we don't think about this too much is, just as I said with currencies, we thought of currencies as basically being fixed, and now they've become incredibly dynamic. These constants have become variables over the last 10 years. It's not just currency, it's fiat or cryptocurrency, okay? Things can conceivably go from nothing to becoming a global currency that's happening in our lifetime, as hard as it is. So in the same way, diplomatic recognition, we usually think of as a 0 or 1 thing. Either something is recognized by all the 190-something countries, UN countries of the world, or none of them. We think of it as 0 or 1. But there are countries in the middle, like Israel, like Taiwan, right, which have some diplomatic recognition from some places, but not others.
That's a pretty good point. Yeah, because you're just like, Taiwan doesn't see themselves as not recognized.
Yes, but China leans on countries.
And they go, you're not a country, and be like, we are though. That's
right. So China leans on places to not recognize them, right? And so what you might do is basically you'd actually, there's actually this book called Invisible Countries and another one called Imagined Communities, both worth reading, right? Invisible Countries talks about all these quasi countries that are kind of hanging out. They're less recognized in Israel and Taiwan, but they're more recognized than something out of nowhere. So Abkhazia, Catalonia, the Basques, Kurdistan, all these different groups.
Yeah, Catalonia is a big one, right? They're constantly trying to secede.
Right, exactly. And so the Catalonians at least some of the Catalonian nationalists like the concept of the network state. Why? Because historically, you've only really had 2 options. Either A, they could be sort of dominated by Spain, right? Or B, there's some insurgency, Irish type thing, and it's, that's super messy in its own way, right? So how do they preserve their language and culture and so on? Well, one possible alternative is C, a network state, where Catalonians start crowdfunding territory around the world, and they give up on this land and this state, but maybe they have some land and some state of their own, okay? Now, this is actually the motivation for the network state comes from Theodor Herzl's book, Theodor Herzl wrote a book called Der Judenstaat, which translates as the Jewish state, and that was the book that led to the formation of Israel. And he was basically making a very similar case to the Jewish people, and he said, look, we are a nation, we're a group of people, but we don't have a state, right? We're a stateless nation. And how can we get one? And he was actually like, look, we're in modern parlance, he'd be like a tech founder. He was talking about how, even in 1897, he's talking about the death of distance. He's like, we have steamships, we can move across large distances, so we should pick from the best spot. Should we do it in Argentina or Palestine? And other places that were considered later were like Madagascar or Birabidzen, So they were, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I should have picked Argentina.
Well, maybe. Yeah, exactly. So there's,
we got a lot smoother.
Might have gone smoother, right? Exactly. So, but it's hard to know what would happen. Maybe there would have been some local backlash or whatever, but
too many Nazis. They're going, no, we gave our.
Who knows, right? But that's definitely a hinge point in history, right?
Yeah.
Point being, this is something where the cloud community went and found land, right? Now, I'm not a utopian. I'm not saying that everything always goes well or what have you. I am saying, one of the things about the network state is I try to take inspiration from the best of different kinds of states, right? So Israel was started by a book, and it had this kind of reverse diaspora that found land and was flexible on where they went to, so long as they could get a state somewhere, okay? India was started non-violently, okay? It got independence non-violently. That's definitely something to emulate. Singapore has like a CEO founder, and they built like this amazing economic engine from nothing, right? And America, of course, too many influences name, but of course it's got its constitution, and that's and all this tradition of jurisprudence and so on.
So when you're whenever you're starting something from scratch, it's so much easier to just like
import.
Yeah, because you just like get all this, like whatever you're doing, you get all these clutter, even if it's like a company of like an employee that you're like, he's been working here, we can't really fire him. Whatever it is, it's so much easier.
Yeah, you guys can't fire each other.
And what do you do about like a military, like when you need
good question?
Because I imagine that's a question that probably
so this is something people ask. I'll write about this in the V2, but two or three things about this. First is Bitcoin and Ethereum have guarded hundreds of billions of dollars without a military, right? They managed to do that via pure encryption, mainly because a military isn't actually valuable to steal from them. You can point a tank at something, but no amount of violence can solve certain kinds of math problems. That's Assange's line, right? So to decrypt these networks and take the money from all these people around the world, right? When you take a look at that image of the network state, right, it looks like Bitcoin miners or Ethereum, stakers or what have you for a reason. It's decentralized. If you have, take my example of 100,000 people in 100 pockets around the world, how are you going to nuke that?
Yeah,
you can.
You can't. And this actually goes back
to... You have to just nuke their, like, servers
But you can't. They don't have a server. It's on just individual computers all over the place,
exactly.
Right?
So the thing is, why was the internet built? Going all the way back to the very, 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 very beginning of the internet, why was it built?
Was it a military thing?
Just in case there's a nuclear bomb, just so they can
It was meant to have a communications network that could resist a nuclear attack.
Gotcha.
Okay? So that was the original motivation.
So it's almost like Vietnam or something, where it's like it's hard to win those wars because everyone's just everywhere in little tiny pockets. There's no central things.
Like that. And, in some sense, sometimes a technology is so important that it shapes the state itself. For example, the Great Wall of China is this gigantic thing, right, that you can see it from space that is like an actual gigantic physical border, right? And, the invention of oceanic navigation allowed states to become like, ocean-spanning empires. The British Empire was not possible before you had ships that could, go across oceans. That was a pretty hard thing to build, right? So sometimes technology changes the shape of a state itself, and as the internet rises, and unfortunately, you get more and more showdowns between nuclear powers, right? You're having the U.S. versus Russia, the U.S. versus China. You're having the presence of hot war between nuclear powers. That was unthinkable when we were growing up, right?
Yeah.
The issue is, if you just flip a coin, you keep flipping a coin, you keep rolling the dice, eventually something bad will happen. And so, or could happen, let's put it like that, right? And so on the other side of that, a network state is nuke resistant for several reasons. First is, it's just distributed, okay? And most people don't think about it this way. They just think of a nuke as the biggest, baddest gun. And so therefore someone will submit, right? But that'll only work if it's like a concentrated group of people in one known place, right? If it's a group of folks that are distributed all around the world, if you nuke them, you're nuking a bunch of your allies too, right? Yeah. You're nuking a building in the middle of nowhere. You're killing all these other people around who are your allies, number one. So it's not target enough. Number two is, a network state doesn't need to actually have every node on the map being revealed. It can be encrypted.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so the secret state. And in fact, you go from secret society to secret states because you can't hit what you can't see. And so now it's something where your private keys...
So everyone's like a ninja, basically.
Well, right, so you go from private property... I mean, basically, put it like this. If you go to the top of some, skyscraper in New York, whatever, and you look over all of those windows, how many of them have you ever been in?
Yeah, like very few, yeah.
Very few, right? In a sense...
Maybe 40, 50.
This guy's bragging.
All right, sure.
I guess I didn't get the invite because I've been to none of them.
Sure. So most folks, only a small fraction, okay? Perhaps present companies. So your passport, actually, to the U.S. only allows you to really walk the streets of New York. And maybe, you're really on the ground floor. Most of what you're seeing is inaccessible territory. You need a second private passport, whether it's a hotel room key or an apartment key card to get in, or an office card to get into those little spots there, right? So most of that territory is actually off limits. It's invisible to you. You don't even know what's behind that.
Uh-huh.
Extend that, right?
I do, but he doesn't, yeah.
You do, okay, right. So if we take the premise that most of what is in cities nowadays is digitally gated private space. Digitally gated because it's a key card.
Yeah.
Private space because you can't see in it.
It already is, yeah.
Right? If that's true, if most of what's in cities is digitally gated private space, we can invert that and say digitally gated private space constitutes most of what's in cities.
Dude, it does make so much sense, because if you're like, when you walk by and you see, oh, look at that big thing, that's Google. Like, why wouldn't you be like, oh, look at that big thing? Like, Stuytown is like legitimately, whereas there's 5,000 units. You just be like, oh, that's part of like, whatever, 8chan world or whatever.
Exactly,
yeah.
right. And or you don't even have a logo. You've intentionally made it opaque to the world.
Yeah, you
right?
have like a key thing, yeah.
You have a key thing, and it's just opaque to the world because why show it off? It's just like a blank facade, attracts no attention, right? And many...
I guess if people move their girls in, they probably won't leave it blank facade for a while.
Well, it really depends.
Try to soup it up a little.
Yeah, it depends. And the thing
Start out when it's just the boys, it'll probably be...
Well, so like the entire San Francisco culture of being a slob, okay, has a benefit, right? Which is, it's like, you can't tell the difference between a really wealthy person and just like an average guy. You're walking down the street and you're just wearing really the same clothes.
Yeah.
It is the opposite. It's inconspicuous consumption as opposed to conspicuous consumption. Why? You're almost like visually encrypting, okay? In the cloud, you might be 50 feet tall, right? But on the land, why attract attention?
Yeah.
Especially in an untrusted zone, if there's folks who might want to mug you or whatever, right? They don't even know you have anything. So it's like, like you're invisible to predators or things like that, right? And I actually think that the world that we're in today is actually an atypical world in the sense of how visible it is. Okay. Signal and WhatsApp are just a harbinger of us moving back into encrypted, illegible environments. All the kids nowadays, what do? They have a Finsta and a Rinsta. Have you heard that term?
Finsta, yeah, like the fake Instagram.
Exactly. So on their fake Instagram, they use a fake name and they're their real self. On the real Instagram, they use their real name and they're their fake self. So the real Instagram, they're in their...
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's like the one where if you're getting a job and your employer goes, "What's your Instagram?" You go, "Here you go."
Here you go. Exactly. And it's in Sunday Best, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And on, Finsta is, all the stuff that is... but crucially, one of the things they do is they use a search-resistant identity on Finsta, right? Why? Because...
What does that mean? Like
no name.
Something that can't be Googled.
Yeah.
It can't be linked to them via Googling. Only their friends know about it. It's a 12-follower account just for their friends.
Yeah, it's like a private account, no name. Like, okay.
That's right. And or if the name, it's like a made-up name. It's this Satoshi Nakamoto style name, right?
Do you know who he is?
I have a guess.
You have a guess?
Yeah. But
nice. That'd be cool.
He's probably not alive. But
really?
Yeah. In the community, people think he's Hal Finney. Who's Hal Finney? If you don't know who Hal Finney is.
I don't.
Yeah, okay. So he's an amazing cryptographer who unfortunately passed away and so on. The thing is, I can say that and nobody will believe me. It's actually great, And one thing that's interesting is Satoshi's pseudonymity was actually itself a form of decentralization. You know why?
And that's the guy who started Ethereum, right?
No. That's Vitalik.
That's Vitalik.
Oh, Vitalik.
So
I've seen Vitalik on a lot of things. Kids.
Yeah. So
you guys are having a good laugh there.
No. That's fine.
The YouTube comments are just lighting up
You guys
right
had a
now.
nice little chuckle there.
Is this live? It's not live.
No.
All right.
But we're keeping that in.
Okay. So
this guy doesn't even know all the freaking every Bitcoin.
No, whatever. It's fine. It's just funny. So the whole concept of Bitcoin, right, is like the mining and the stuff is everywhere, so it's everywhere and nowhere. You can't shut it down very easily. A non or less obvious point is that Satoshi Nakamoto choosing to be pseudonymous rather than using his quote real name. A better term than real name, by the way, is like state name, right, or official name. It's like
government name.
Government name, exactly, right? Because the non-obvious part is pseudonymity is itself a form of decentralization because your government name is like a global identifier. Okay, given Ryan Long, okay, someone can punch that into a database like Google or anything else and pull up all of these records on you. Now, your name is not unique. There's going to be others who have that name, right?
There's a bit of an issue with this Jeopardy champion.
That Jeopardy champion's screwing up my SEO.
Is that right? Okay, fine. But the thing is that never before in human history has it been possible to pull up every snippet of anybody can stalk anybody with given their real name, right?
Yeah.
And so that is something where another term for a name is a handle, if you ever heard that term. So think of it as like literally a handle on a file, file cabinet. People can just pull out the file on it, right? And so the alternative to that, to having this name that's at the center of 1,000 databases, that's the primary key to look up all this information, is to start totally afresh, right? Have a node over here, Satoshi Nakamoto, that has nothing attached to it.
Yeah.
Okay. And now any attachments to it are those that you have consciously sought out. Satoshi Nakamoto set up Bitcoin Talk, and he set up like his code base and so on and so forth. Now, of course, the what budded off of that became this gigantic network, and all this energy, this is swirling around this, but the man walks unscathed.
Yeah, because there was nothing linked to him, right?
There's nothing linked. These are two totally, the pseudonym network.
It's like an avatar.
I remember seeing something
yeah.
Vitalik saying when they gave him all what was the Shiba Inu or something when they tried to promote the thing, and then so he donated it all because he didn't want it, but he's like, I heard him talking about it, and he's like, I had to go access it. He's like, I had to call my parents up, and then he's like, they had half of my key, and I had to go buy a laptop that had never been online before, and then he's like, I go online for the 1 second, like do this stuff. He's like, throw out the laptop, like all just to maintain that, like I guess air gap, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, there's no connection ever.
Right. Yeah. So that's like if you want to be. I do think about this sometimes because if Vitalik takes that kind of precaution, and I also take significant precautions, we do need to work on crypto usability. Yeah. Like,
well, I did. I co-hosted the show once in Toronto, and one of the Ethereum guys, I think Anthony D'Onofrio,
Diorio, okay.
Diorio, yeah, right.
I might be pronouncing.
No, I think you're right. You're right.
Okay.
He was on the show, and he was like, he was talking, and he had like 4 bodyguards with him.
Yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, this is my life. Because
or you could just like basically be in high security locations, and just not disclose your location.
Anyone that has a lot of money, I guess, to some degree. Hey,
or Asia. Asia is reasonably high security.
On the topic of like what you just said, which was one thing we were talking about before you came in here, like when you're talking about like some of it does feel a little too, like out. I don't know if out of reach for normal. It's just here's an example. Like, I know a lot of people, there's a lot of money in crypto, and they're like, hey, we want to have, like, all of these, make movies in that space. And we want, like, and I've been approached a lot of times, right? But and there's all these people that have all these versions of things that exist, like in entertainment, right? But, like, none of them actually, in reality, anyone kind of uses them to any, like, real extent.
Yeah.
So it's like...
They're all theoretical.
Well, yeah, it, like, really, all these people, they're like, we have money and we want to do things. And I think from my perspective, it's like... It's not that I'm just not I'm not after like a cash grab that no one's going to see. So it's like there's no like what will be the first one where you're like, yo, everyone's actually like watching this thing in there. Do you think? And then that's like the first part of it.
Sure. So, well, first is do you remember the .com bubble?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, basically, there's a huge surge of energy going into internet companies. Many of them crashed and ended up with nothing. The things that really did keep growing, though, the main thing was just internet connectivity. People were just getting online, right? That itself was like a thing, And then over time, a few years after the .com bubble, really 2004, right, was when Google's IPO was. And then people were like, wait a second, you can make money on the internet? For 4 years, no one had believed you could make money on the internet because of the .com crash, and everyone's focused on 9/11 and Iraq and all this stuff. And Google showed you could make money on the internet. And then, but Google was like the only
Yeah.
that was doing so for a long time.
You said even how like MySpace like never really figured out how to make money.
Yeah, exactly. So Facebook and Twitter got started in the mid 2000s, and they were looked at as total frou-frou, stupid things where, they're also never going to make money. People use them, but they're not going to make money. And it was really only 2008, 2009, after the iPhone and the financial crisis and so on, that the modern internet really took off. That is when Google and Facebook really went vertical in terms of ads.
Why do you think that is?
Several reasons. One is that
iPhone?
Well, the iPhone was huge, right? That was huge.
But was there like something about like all of like crashing out all the bad stuff to start again or something?
Yeah, it's something where like there's just a lot of stuff that got built over the 2000s. Like open source became better. A lot of stuff that's invisible to the public, right?
Okay.
Like a lot of back-end infrastructure where something that might have taken 1,000 lines of code to do was one line, right? A lot of that type of stuff is invisible. It's back-end stuff, So open source stacks got good. Social and search had proved themselves out. AWS had finally worked. A lot of companies tried to do what has become Amazon Web Services, like data center in the cloud, before Amazon executed on it. Apple obviously did the iPhone, and mainstream media, basically everybody who had been running ads in 2008 in mainstream media suddenly had a cash crunch and needed to look for more efficient channels. So necessity brought them to the internet. And even
that's a big part of it now, right?
That's right. So even in 2008, 2009, Joel Stein, other folks have written in that era lists of the power centers of the U.S. Silicon Valley was not on those lists.
And how many people were on the list? It was like 10.
It was the Pentagon, Hollywood, New York, Madison Avenue. It was kind of what the older institutions of the U.S. were.
They always miss it.
Well, so here's the thing: this whole internet tech thing is basically about 10 years old. It's very, very, it's very young, right? If you think, right? And Uber, Airbnb,
and it's already moving on to the next thing. Apparently,
it's moving on to the next thing. So Uber, Airbnb, Stripe, they're all basically 08, 09, 2010 founded, right? This whole internet era is very, very recent. People's memories have sort of been rewritten. But if you go back and look, it was not like that before the iPhone. The internet, it was just thought of as gadgets.
I guess I do
as gadgets. Well, it's like the BlackBerry, which even now, at the time, was the most amazing device because that's the gold standard, and then the iPhone came out, and all of a sudden you're like, this thing is a piece of shit.
I stuck it out for a while.
I know. Ryan was like, I remember that. You're like, I love the keyboard.
That's right. So now
the last man
keyboard warrior,
Tim Allen.
So now let's take that and apply it to crypto, right? So the internet represented a fundamental improvement on just how we deal with information, right? Things we totally take for granted. You can copy paste. Okay, that's computers, but just general. You can copy paste. You can send instantly to people, via an email. You can search index. You can, everything you can think of that you can do with information, you can do with a few keystrokes. Just to put that in perspective, again, within human memory, Xerox was invented in the 1900s. Not 1900s, but I think it's 1950s or 60s. I don't remember exactly when. The photocopier was invented within living memory. Okay.
Yeah.
You couldn't just change the font on a document with one tap. You had to go and reprint out the whole thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you couldn't change fonts. You couldn't copy paste. You couldn't search. You couldn't change color tones. All of these things.
Stuff that's just nothing now.
Stuff that's just nothing now was a massive effort back then. Okay. And we don't really think about that too much because we're sort of, something is awesome, and then within a few months it's taken for granted as part of your workflow if it works, right? So, but the improvements, you're talking about orders and orders of magnitude on the speed of transmitting information. 9 orders of magnitude in some cases. Just to give you one example, okay? As you
Upload speeds.
Go ahead.
Upload speeds.
Yeah, sure. So exactly, right? So, but give you one example. Let's say if you go from sending a physical mail to sending an email to sending a group email to a Facebook thread, okay? Each of those is incremental, but the combination is ridiculous. Okay, so sending a physical mail to sending an email, you send it express, FedEx or something, the highest price thing, and it arrives in maybe 24 hours, okay? But you send an email and it arrives in seconds or minutes. The thing is, at that time, you had to spend a huge amount of money up front, and the other guy had to spend money. So it's okay, well, yeah, it's faster, but I have to spend $5,000 for a computer system, an internet system, and this guy does too. Am I really going to send that many emails to this person as a one-off? Seems kind of stupid. So corporations did it for intranets first. Then corporations were sending between, or not just corporations, academia was doing it, and then corporations were doing it. And out of that, eventually, it started to come to the home user in the 90s. So there's physical mail to email. Then you go email to group email. Now you can send a reply all thread. Okay. Now you go from reply all to a Facebook thread where people can reply and post messages, thumbs up, whatever.
Bug you all day.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So now you take this, and I haven't posted on Facebook in a long time, or Twitter, whatever. Take a Facebook thread. You compare how expensive that would be to do with physical mail. Okay. Let's say you've got 300 people in your Facebook thread, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Imagine taking 300 picture postcards, sending stamps to 300 people. 2 of them come back. One set, and each one of them, when they want to make a comment, okay, they come back to you with lol,
unfollowed,
or something like that, right? They mail it back, and then you have to rebroadcast that out to the other 300 people, and just keep doing this. All right, like what is
it called? Polaroid.
I mean, to think about something like even this right now, like the people are watching this on YouTube, and then there's that comment section below.
Yeah.
On top of essentially like a network TV station.
They have to come to your house and yell at you.
That's right. That's right. So and like just within living memory, I mean, you know the Unabomber, right?
Yeah.
The Unabomber. Do you know why
Big fan, yeah.
Okay. You know why he killed all those people?
Yeah. That it was something with. I watched it. It was the government.
He killed all those people to get an op-ed in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
I did not
so
know that. I'm thinking of a different bomber.
Yeah, okay, different. So the Unabomber killed for the distribution.
But didn't the Unabomber have the big manifesto?
That's the same guy.
Oh, okay.
That manifesto.
Because he wanted to post this big manifesto. Okay.
Yeah, so in the early 90s, distribution of your concepts, your words, etc., was so scarce that he had to kill multiple people, so he thought, to get the distribution.
Yeah.
Okay? Now you could just have a podcast.
I mean,
someone as crazy as that could have a podcast.
We know a lot of people with a manifesto probably that are posting it online every day, and they're still thinking like, do I have to kill a guy?
well, right. So the thing is, of course,
too easy.
Of course, it's both bad and good, right? Essentially, there's a lot of people who won't kill somebody, but they certainly will troll somebody, and that's a lot of people on Twitter. There might be 1,000x as many people who will do something insane and stupid and mean and angry for distribution on Twitter versus those who actually go and kill somebody. So that's obviously the bad part. The good part is that distribution has opened up in a dramatic way, and now everybody can have a podcast, a TV show, et cetera, right? What's my point? Putting it together.
Yeah, how does it look like in the future on the decentralized world?
So once we have seen just like the degree of the exponential on the internet and computers within our lifetime, it's like, as I said, this thing is 10 years old. And even during the 2000s, the internet was basically mostly dismissed. Like, people were on the internet, but it was not the center of all government and so on and so forth. Like, you know, politicians who they thought of the internet as kind of this swampy thing that's sort of below them, and they were on
the dark web.
No, it wasn't even the dark web.
But that's how they viewed it almost. Like
no, it wasn't yet coded as malign, because even in 2008 and 2012,
this is like clunky and like
it's like a hobbyist.
Facebook helped Obama get elected, if you remember, in 2008, 2012, and Facebook was really good, considered good by the press in 2008 and 2012 because it did so, right? So the internet was either harmless or cute. Whatever. It wasn't like the real affairs of state.
And then it got the wrong guy elected.
Well, okay, right. So now, but actually, even before then, even in 2013 is when the attitude shifted, because by 2013 you can no longer deny that the internet was crushing old media revenues. It dropped from like 67 billion to like 17 billion in 5 years. There's this graph by Mark Perry, print media disruption. So Google and Facebook took all this revenue. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. Just all went vertical, right? And, that caused...
Yeah, they weren't happy about it.
Them to be unhappy. And so these guys who, in the mainstream press, I call them now, I don't call them the mainstream media. You know what I call them? Downstream media. You know why? Because they're downstream of the internet. They're downstream of you guys, right?
Yeah.
And they're literally just reposting tweets and, so
lists
on.
It's like not your grandmother's media. It's like literally your grandmother's media.
My dad doesn't even get to the paper anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So the downstream media, basically, at that time, they couldn't...
Downstream media, love it.
It's good, right? So they couldn't they couldn't build search engines or social networks, but they could write stories and shape narratives. And the difference between a story and a product release?
One's by the person that did it?
Well, this is kind of a one-liner, but the story has a bad guy. Okay?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so who's the bad guy? It was tech guys. How about that? The guys who just bankrupted and disrupted all these media companies, suddenly they were cast as the villain. And so from 2013 to 2019, 2020, all of these journos were just looking for...
Journos is funny because it sounds like pedos. Like, it just sounds bad.
Yeah. So the journos, right, basically were going after all these people in tech, whether they were an engineer who just made some off-color comment on Twitter.
It was.
Yeah, exactly. And, I mentioned this today, it's like more accountability for somebody's old tweets than all the wars in the Middle East. Right?
Yeah.
So just like hunting these guys, right, for clicks. And that carried on for basically about 7 years. And what it led to, among other things, was the wokeifying of Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon. That's actually MAGA versus MAGA. That's the other MAGA.
Oh, the MAGA.
Right? And Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, right? Is that good, right? So MAGA versus MAGA is what we're shaping up, right? So
yeah, with like no accountability too, because it really is. That's one of the things is once things get big enough, that people can be wrong as many times as they want, and like doesn't matter. Where it's in any sort of newer thing, you're actually like graded on your accomplishments or whatever. But I guess
I
they're
thought
just solving for the wrong. They're like solving for one thing without caring about all the other things.
I thought about this a lot actually, and I was like, how is it that these journalists could be so wrong about everything? They're wrong about Bitcoin, they're wrong about Iraq. There's this book, actually, everybody who's watched this podcast should read this, by Ashley Rinsberg. It's called The Gray Lady Winked, and it just goes through the New York Times history, and you're like, wow, now they're all staying with Ukraine. You know what they were doing in 1932, 1933? Choke out Ukraine.
Really?
Well,
yeah.
I think it
the
almost might be secondary,
the Ukrainian famine. Yeah,
because it's like, well, tell me if you agree with this, but it's almost like we're saying that the journalists are wrong about everything, but it's almost like the politicians and like those people are kind of wrong about everything, and they're like their press secretaries.
It's both and.
Yeah,
exactly.
Or maybe they work together.
Yeah, so it's like it is something where at different times in U.S. history you can argue that one was prime and the other wasn't, right? Nowadays, I think the term the U.S. establishment is better, I think, than the term the U.S. government, because first, people can't deny that a U.S. establishment exists. You might deny that a deep state exists. You cannot deny an establishment exists. An establishment does exist. Second, the term establishment is inclusive of but not coterminous with government, right? The government is part of the establishment, but there are establishment grandees who are not actually government employees.
Ooh, grandees, that's great.
Yeah, right? And so these...
You're an establishment grande.
Establishment grande, right?
Yeah.
So you have, the dean of Harvard is definitely like, part of the establishment. Arthur Sulzberger, the publisher of the New York Times, absolutely part of the establishment, albeit not the U.S. government, right?
Yeah.
So these are... One way of thinking about it is the control circuitry for the formal government lies outside of the formal government and is itself resistant to the democracy it claims to support. For example, Sulzberger has like dual class stock, so he can't be actually, there's no hostile takers are very difficult, right? Or you have a tax exempt foundation like Harvard, right? Or you have something where it's a regulator and they've got career tenure. Or you've got a professor and they've got tenure, right? Yeah. So these guys can't be, they're not electable to the electorate or the market. They've got these, protected positions in different ways, whether it's tenure or it's tax exemption or it is dual class or something like that.
They're actually successful if you just understand what they're optimizing for.
They are, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're optimizing for power, not for being correct.
And if you own the New York Times, right, like you have the power to kind of just dispatch the people who don't agree with you.
Well, so just on this topic, right, like, Mark Zuckerberg, you may agree or disagree. I don't agree with every decision he's made, but I do admire him because he is the son of a dentist, right? There's a lot of people who went to Harvard. He's way more successful than basically a lot of folks combined. And he built the whole thing, So Zuckerberg built his fortune, okay? And people all recognize his face, okay? If I say Arthur G. Sulzberger, do you recognize his face?
No.
How interesting is Yeah, or his name.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Sulzberger inherited the New York Times Company. And it is a company. It is a publicly traded company. It has dual class stock. And when you look at it in the New York Times, if you go and Google, for example, how Punch protected the Times, you'll see Joe Nocera in like 2012 talk about how great it is that the New York Times has dual class stock. If you then Google how you can't fire Mark Zuckerberg's kids, you'll see a different New York Times writer talk about how horrible it is that Mark Zuckerberg has dual class stock.
Right. Yeah.
So dual class stock is good when they have it and bad when they don't have it. This is when I remember the thing I was saying where it's like basically whatever is good is that supports the social network and whatever is bad is that which is against it, right? So dual class itself is essentially what it is it's an old tactic. It's a universalist argument for particularist ends. This is the same that the Russians did during, the Soviet Union. The universalist argument was communism. The particularist end was the expansion of the Russian Empire.
Yes.
Right? And so this, you can generalize it as talk left, act right. Okay? Let's say you're evil Elon Musk. Okay? Evil Elon Musk, all right? What would he want to do? He would want to...
Tweet.
Well, okay, sure. But evil Elon Musk would want to export strikes to General Motors and Ford,
Okay.
and so right. All of them would be riven by internal dissension at each other's throats. They're not shipping anything. Like blah blah, all this labor unrest, right? While his company practices a Nietzschean variety of aligned capitalism. Okay, and if you look at someone like Sulzberger, right? His newspaper talks endlessly about like white privilege. This is like the ultimate privileged white. He's got this giant mansion, which somehow is not in the paper. His face isn't in the paper. Okay. And, this thing about, people are bad for going to, taking their kids out of public school. These guys all go to private school, right?
Yeah.
They don't even know what a public school is.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is that it's something where you really need to like play the man, not the ball.
Yes.
And because what they're saying, they'll talk left, they'll export left, but they will practice the most like ruthless capitalist kind of thing, like out of a caricature that you'd ever find, right? And this is something where now people in tech in particular are seeing this, because people in tech are basically self-made, right? Zuckerberg built his fortune, Sulzberger inherited his. The thing about like these old media grandees, right? These they're basically, I call them the meritless nepotists, right? Because they have no merit. They literally inherited their fortunes, their newspapers, etc. It's not that they get great coverage, they get no coverage.
Because they're in charge of the coverage.
They're in charge of coverage.
And I'm sure if some other like paper magnate want to start some war, it benefits nobody. So then they both keep each other's names out of their
But
mouth.
Zuck, for all his
just keep each other's names.
Zuck, for all his faults, and all the tech people, for all their faults, have given everybody a voice, right? That is what the establishment hates so much, right? It is not that, this is a threat to democracy. What they hate is what we would call democracy, the voice that people have now. All these people around the world have a voice. They hate that. They're not against filter bubbles. They're against the plural filter bubble. They want only one filter bubble, which is like old media or whatever, right? The halcyon age of, I guess, 2007, if the MAGA guys want to wind back the clock to 1950, these guys want to wind back the clock to like 2007 or something like that, when they were still dominant and tech was just making gadgets, right? But there's so many more shoes to drop, Have you seen the AI content creation?
The DALL-E?
DALL-E,
We were
right?
just talking, because I saw your tweets yesterday.
Yes.
And
go ahead.
we were just, because I have DALL-E and it's really cool. The whole thing is amazing to me, and I can't imagine like how much better it's going to be in a year from now. But we were kind of talking about like what other stuff is this going to?
Yeah, it's like,
Yes.
how does like that look like kind of moving forward?
Do we have any sort of career as comedians and podcasters?
Oh,
in
absolutely.
Like 10 years?
I think they become tools more than competitors.
Yeah, it's like, think about it. You have Photoshop and you have copy paste, and so Photoshop actually does some really
I've
amazing.
had ideas for what would be an AI thing forever that I didn't have the idea to do it, but I always thought a music video app where, and I'll say this in 5 seconds, but like, imagine like if you're a kid, you take the music video, it takes forever to people learn how to edit and like all this stuff, but they're all formats. So basically you film yourself singing the song 4 times, then you film B-roll of yourself like doing a move, and then it just makes you a music video.
Yes. Yeah.
Like why? Like those? Like that kind of stuff could be like, what if I just did this and then my thing edits it for me? Or you
Totally. Or you could just do like in the style of Spike Jonze or something.
Take a look at Runway ML. Okay, so that's doing kind of what you're saying. You type, and it's like, I thought about this concept a long time ago. I actually have a spec for it called the screenplay compiler, where you write a screenplay, you hit enter, and it's like lights, camera, action, and so on. And I had thought of it as instructions for something like Unity, which is like a 3D, engine or whatever, right? The new VR stuff, AI stuff is way better than that.
just makes it.
It just makes it, right? Because it turns it into like a natural language description of the thing, okay? And what that does is it doesn't...
Terrible news from Jim from The Office.
Well, so here's what it does. It decentralizes Hollywood, right? Like if old media...
And it's already been happening.
That's right. If the downstream media was sucking wind before, this is just going to finish it, right? But now what's going to happen is a kid from Nigeria, a kid from Brazil, a kid from India... People from anywhere in the world can now tell their own stories in their own language, in their own voices, without going through, like, basically American media corporations, right? So this is this powerful decentralizing thing where, and that's what they actually hate. And so they'll always talk about how, AI ethics requires us to centralize it and have some, like, token diversity. For example, there's one AI company, which is actually got a lot of smart people there, and I respect what they've done in other ways, but they make it so when you type something in and it's like you're asking for a fireman, they'll just add like Black, Hispanic, Asian as words to the end of it that you can't see or edit out, and it just generates like images for you because now you're diverse. It's like forced diversity, right?
That's so funny that they coded it in.
Yeah, they coded it in, but it's like the most cartoonish, like caricatured version of it, because let's say you're in Japan, you might want Japanese people and Ainu, right?
Yeah.
Or there's different people in different cultures have a different notion of what's inclusive.
No, of course, but like imagine you're like, hey, I want like a race car driver, and then it gives you a girl. You're like, you know what I meant?
Well,
like stop it.
Yeah,
Danica Patrick, Ryan's.
Yeah. So basically, essentially, what it is it's something where true non-discrimination requires decentralization. Right? This way, basically, everybody can have something that reflects their own culture without it being like centralized,
Yeah.
And I think that is really the sort of winning argument on this, because otherwise what you've got is these people who will argue that for the benefit of the world, we need to centralize all the power. Right? To defend equality.
Which is like almost
Which
natural.
is, those are the people with the power.
Well, exactly.
That, right? Nobody is without the power.
That's right. But
and always it's like, also I should be the one that has it.
Exactly. AI ethics, that's exactly right. AI ethics, as it's currently construed, of course, even the term is basically a stolen base. Who are you? Against ethics? Are you unethical? Right?
Yeah.
So, instead I call it, or you can also call it AI bias, not as the study of how AI is biased, but the study of how to bias AI. Okay? And so AI bias is basically something which argues that in order to maintain equality, everything must be centralized at Google or a few of these companies. But of course, that degree of centralization of power is itself unequal. Not everybody has that power, right?
Yeah, to influence the AI.
That's right. So power inequality, exactly, that's right. So power inequality is maximal when it's centralized, right? So the decentralized argument is, like, there's things like so-called stable diffusion, which actually is open source. Anybody can run it, right? That is, I think, the winning argument on this. And as opposed to, I can find it humorous.
No, I think you're so right, because even if you look at just from a moral argument, it would be like, what you're saying, they're saying it's like, well, we needed to have all these things, but it's like, okay, well, why wouldn't it be that? Like you said, like anyone living in India, and they're like, well, it has to be diverse people in America. You're like, you're already, even by that definition, like broaden it out one more like level, and you're wrong now.
That's right. And so here's the thing, like, I actually do respect people who are like, talk left, act left. I think they're actually consistent. I may not agree with them all the time, just like I don't necessarily agree with people who are talk right, act right, but at least I think they're consistent. And so in this context, like V1 would be like an American guy who's like, why can't we have Rocky and Rambo and so on and so forth? V2 has a superposition of two kinds of people. There's a genuine person who's like, why can't we tell more inclusive stories? And then there's, in my view, a non-genuine person who's saying, why can't we tell more inclusive stories in order to centralize the power and the money at that company, okay? Now, how can we give the genuine person here and the conservative what they want?
And there's a third one of the person that's like doing it, but for someone else, and they don't realize it.
Sure, like a pawn or something, right?
Yeah.
So the thing is, for the talk right, act right, and talk left, act left person, I'm sympathetic to both of them. And I think the V3 is decentralize it.
You can be both. Yeah.
Exactly. So the conservative can get their Rockies and Rambos and so on and so forth. But we can also tell the stories, allow people around the world to tell the stories, because I don't think conservative actually doesn't want that to happen. They just also want their own stories, right?
Yeah, and then the other people could get the girl Rambo or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Because, if you're growing up in the U.S. and you didn't see yourself represented and so on, I actually am sympathetic to that, though I don't think that means you have to like shit on white guys for that, right? We can solve this problem by giving everybody their own compiler and letting them tell their own stories, right?
Yeah, because it doesn't.
But then
really
they would
end
say,
up
well,
that way
not
anyway.
everybody can tell their own stories.
And then I'd say that's
And he's
patronizing.
saying,
Well,
now-
they start playing that whole game.
But
Yeah,
that's
Talk about
why
the
I always
beginning.
like say that I'm like such a fan of the way you talk, because it's like he's like, they're like, well, not everyone can tell your stories. He's like, well, here's how.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not. It's like, yeah, you're right, and that's what I'm like changing.
And they're like, but I like being a victim.
and they're like, yeah, well, you're right, because they are just like, all right, well, we actually like being able to say this.
yeah. So right. So exactly. So I think, insofar as I think a lot of things are like this, by the way, where there's sort of like a V1 that kind of assumes an American default. Then there's this kind of intermediate stage of whether you call it woke capitalism that is faux inclusive, right? And then there's true inclusivity, which is decentralization, which actually gives the genuine people here and the genuine people here something while taking power away from the centralists.
Kind of like sports, really. It's like
Go
who's
ahead.
the best, you know?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell me about that.
No, and I was
Yeah.
just like, I was saying that like that's the most decentralized industry in terms of like,
Or at least
who's
equal.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because
like if you go running, like to some degree,
Ah.
it's like I think it's gonna be hard to find another one that's like probably closer in terms of like the
golf,
talent.
I think golf is a good one. Where like in golf, whoever's the best that day was the best.
No, because then people don't play golf.
Well, I guess that's true.
It's funny you say it. So I mean, like historically, golf was considered a very hoity-toity thing because course and that's expensive and so on.
Yachting and golf.
Yeah. Yachting golf very inclusive. No, running is definitely very inclusive. But the thing that's interesting is you use the term sports for that, and that's why I was like kind of because I would call that athletics or something. I think the whole era of spectator sports of like fat people watching fit people is ending in some ways, or it's declining.
Fat people watching fit people.
Right, it's funny.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And so instead, we want is like the participatory stuff, right? Like where people go running together, they go lifting together, and now it's something where whether it's like Runkeeper or apps like this, I sort of want to see things where I don't know, like a fantasy football league, but it's a fantasy fitness league where folks are like competing to kind of, I don't know, reduce body fat or things like that. And so they're actually getting some benefit from it rather than just drinking beer and cheering somebody on the couch. I'm not completely against that. I mean, that can be fun or whatever at times, right? But it's also something where it's not actually benefiting the person who's doing it, whereas this is actually compounding their fitness.
That's true. I guess a lot of people, like I have a lot of friends that like that's just their event that they get together and do. And if it wasn't that, it would be whatever else it was.
I'm not against that. I'm not anti that. I do, however, think that going from that sort of era of like circuses to one where it's like individualized fitness and it's actually gaining you some benefit while doing it is better, right?
I guess always, yeah.
But and if you've got spare time, you'd rather spend an hour on this versus that. This compounds for the individual versus this is just entertainment.
Pastime,
it's entertainment budget.
I know you're kind of running late for dinner here, so
it's fine. We can go. One thing I want to talk about is your woke versus racist video because I think it's way deeper than you might think.
Okay.
Well,
yeah. Tell me what you think. Yeah.
All right. Great.
I'm sure that everyone like watching this knows it. Yeah.
Sure. So. This video, if you guys want to watch, I mean, it was extremely well done. Actually, both of you were in it. Okay, it's pitch perfect. I laughed. I cried. No, just kidding. But the reason I thought it was actually perhaps even more deep than you might think is, have you seen the political compass?
Yeah.
Right. So it's got like authoritarian left, authoritarian right, libertarian left, libertarian right. Okay. Now, to first order, what you can do is you can say that's like communist, fascist, woke, anarcho-capitalist, right? In terms of the extremes of each of those four quadrants. Okay.
Yes.
And one way of thinking about the last 150 years or so is almost like a Z, okay? Communism happened first. In part, as a reaction to communism, fascism arose. At least it styled itself as opposed to communism. And then, in part, as an opposition to fascism, in large part, anti-fascism, Antifa, wokeness, whatever, is down over here. And as an opposition to communism, you have ultra-capitalism down over here, and also as an opposition to Antifa, you've got... So this is the next shoe to drop. Like Bitcoin maximalism, ultra-anarcho-capitalism is kind of like an opposition.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if you look at just by virtue of like just some straight up like pattern recognition, you're like, it even looks like it's going to where I'm saying.
Yeah, so it's something where if you take the political compass, the diagonal axis here... The woke and the fascists are obsessed, as you point out, with the same things, and often come to many of the same conclusions. But from the premise, the fascists will say white people are the best, and the woke will say white people are the worst. But they're just obsessed with race and biology.
Categorization.
Exactly, that's right. And then conversely, the other axis, other diagonal, is the economics axis, right? The political power axis, right? And the communist and the ultra Bitcoin maximalist think, for example, and do you know what Bitcoin maximalists are? You're going to hear a lot more about that.
They're just like they think that Bitcoin is just the only currency.
Yeah, if the communist has replaced...
Keeps exposing me with these questions.
Yeah, so let's say, basically each of these four corners you can kind of see, right? The communist has replaced... let me put it like this. There's some folks who have replaced GOD with GOV, okay? The maximalist has replaced GOV with BTC.
What's GOV?
Government.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so some have replaced the, like God with the government.
Oh, okay, yeah,
right?
100%.
And others have replaced it with Bitcoin.
Government
right?
with Bitcoin.
And if you really want to be flip, it's like the communists have replaced GOD with GOV, the fascists replaced GOD with DNA, the wokes replaced GOD with BLM, and the maximalists have replaced GOD with BTC.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Like Michael Saylor.
Yeah, that's right. And so the thing is, of course, like BLM, the organization, is different than black people because basically, lots of black people don't support, like riots and stuff like that. And just like, like the fascists claim to speak for white people, but obviously lots of white people don't support fascism, right? So these are things where they are like these extreme corners that are kind of focused on. There's basically two buttons you can push to make humans insane. And those are like the race buttons and the economics buttons, right? The race buttons is I'm being discriminated. If you just think about it, right? In this corner, I'm being discriminated against, or I am like the supreme, race or whatever. These things make people insane if you push these buttons, right? And it doesn't have to be like, white people alone pushing those buttons. In many ways, China.
A lot of it's just like a single, palatable answer for why you're having problems right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so China's pushing this button of we are the supreme Han race or whatever, pretty hard up over there, right? Conversely, the communists and the maximalists, this is less discussed, but you're going to see this happen more and more, okay? If you think about what wokes are doing, they're going and accusing everybody of being racist, sexist, homophobe, etc., without any evidence because there's no penalty for a false accusation. They're just like blam, 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 just like firing bullets at people. And if it connects, great, they've got to kill, they gain status. And if not, who cares? There's no penalty for a false accusation, right? What you're seeing now is you're starting to see the emergence of a community that doesn't call people racist, sexist, etc. They call people fraud, scammer, charlatan, and shill. Grifter, exactly. You're starting to see that ramping.
Yeah, you totally are.
Okay, and
Pretty good point.
So rather than accusing people,
and then you see the right, who's always like the left 4 years ago, calling them being like you're actually sexist, or like
yes, that's right.
like the pedophiles, or like they're just trying to they're always like 4 years behind, like doing their
exactly.
terms.
So just like if somebody goes left, you go right. If somebody is pushing on the race button, people push on the economics button. If they're pushing on the economics button, they push on the race button.
Fuck. That's
okay.
True.
So when the communists push the economics button, the Nazis push the race button. When the wokes push the race button, the maximalists are going to be pushing the economics button. Okay.
Yeah.
And maximalists and communists, you may not know about.
So
this.
how do maximalists push the economics button? Is that
how is it
by
similar to the
saying
communists?
You're a fraud to try to take your like
they're saying
economic?
the fiat money's worthless.
Well, so both the maximalists and communists.
Sorry.
What do maximalists and communists both believe? They both believe that most CEOs are frauds. That that everybody's out to kind of defraud you. That your money is everything. That you need to be distrustful and so on and so forth. Okay. The communist thinks the answer is for the government to take all the money. The maximalist thinks the answer is for the government to control none of the money. Okay, but they overlap on lots of things. For example, because there's only 21 million Bitcoin, many maximalists believe deeply that one person's gain is another person's loss. If you're getting Bitcoin, so you don't see crowdfunding very much in the maximalist community.
Yeah, right, because there actually is a zero sum.
There's actually a zero sum.
And also, because they're always because they'll always say like, hey, you can in El Salvador, you can buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin. And they're like, why the hell would I want to buy a cup of coffee with Bitcoin?
It is something where you'll frequently see maximalists will talk up some product because it uses Bitcoin, but not actually buy with it. They want people to sort of be billboards for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Okay,
but they're just accumulating only.
Now, by the way, I say this
is pretty similar.
Okay, so I say this as somebody who's like a huge Bitcoin proponent. In the same way, I can get along with a liberal. I can't. In fact, in many ways, I am a liberal. I can get along with a liberal. I can't get along with a woke. Right? A liberal is somebody who's like donating their time to people and actually doing good deeds. A woke is someone who's burning down black businesses because of what they saw in the news. Right? And
in a lot of ways, you're because you're like a builder, not like a terror downer.
Yeah, exactly. Can I get behind equal treatment under law? Absolutely. Can I get behind that perversion of
obviously.
it, which is like in the lower left corner? No, I can't. Right. And so in the same way, so I didn't mention one, which is a zero sum. Another is the premise that all companies, all banks are scams, no matter what. The communists and maximalists both believe this for different reasons. The communist believes
that's fuck. Yeah.
Okay, so the communist obviously believes it because these are corrupt capitalists and so on.
They believe the government's bailing them out.
The maximalist believes it because the government is bailing them out and giving them money.
Yeah, they get to.
They call
they can't lose.
Yeah, all millionaires.
Games rigged, yeah.
Games rigged. All millionaires are cantillionaires. Have you heard that term?
What's that?
No.
A cantillionaire is somebody. So the Cantillon effect is a real thing, where when the government prints money, it doesn't land in everybody's pocket equally. Some people are close to the spigot and benefit from it first.
Oh yeah, I see. You were talking about how it depends on where you are placed in the economy, because sometimes by the time you get it, it's been 4 months, and now the price
has all gone up.
Okay,
exactly, that's right. And in fact, actually, this is a big part of the impoverishment of the red states over the 2010s. This actually came out before the pandemic.
All the red states, because
they didn't get the money, they didn't get the printed money. Okay,
because all the money goes to the finance people that they're like operating like that. And then
so here's what happened.
Okay.
Here's like this is the thing is we can't. It's not like a blockchain where I can actually track it and do the forensics on it. I can't prove this yet, but maybe somebody can put together the numbers and call this a hypothesis, all right? But basically, if there's an article in actually the journal, Wall Street Journal, which is like I think it's like Democrat and Republican live in different worlds. Here's the numbers, like 2019. What it showed was that like in the 2000s. There are roughly equal numbers of prosperous and poor Democrat and Republican districts. Over the 2010s, by now, something like 26 out of 27 of the most prosperous districts are Democrat. There's been this enormous shift, right, where the districts that are the wealthy districts are Democrat districts and not over here, okay? Like, essentially, Republicans suddenly just collapsed and went downscale. Why did that happen? One thesis is that the printed money of D.C. went to financiers who also invested some in tech. It's only a trickle in tech, by the way, because like venture capital is only a tiny fraction of what's in the old money world. But some did go into tech, okay? And so you had New York and DC and tech, Silicon Valley and so on. Those were actually rising as zip codes over the 2010s, whereas all these guys in the center, all these red states were getting effectively diluted down without even understanding what was happening. It's as if you had a cap table with 1 million shares and like 10 million more were printed, but nobody could see it happening really. And it got awarded in such a way that it diluted this guy down who had 50% down to like 5%.
And he didn't even know about it till 4 months.
Till his prices were going up and suddenly the dollar is going less and so on and so forth. And it's not visible to him and it's deniable because it's all happening. It's not on a blockchain. You can't actually see what's going on. Okay. Now this was actually up to 2019. Now in the 2020s, we've had even more insane amounts of money printing that make that look like, 1/10 of what is happening now.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
There.
And so I think you're going to see this even exacerbate to a great extent. So what happens is you have maximalists who will argue, and again, as I said, I'm sympathetic to some of these arguments, that all millionaires are cantillionaires. Why? Because they just benefited from this printed money. All banks are bailed out banks. They're not legitimate, right? All these fortunes are illegitimate. All these companies are scams, et cetera, right? And the entire economy is zero sum.
Would the argument for them be like, hey, if I was going to, it's like if you enter an industry and then you enter another industry where they're like, yeah, the argument would be like, yeah, that's part of the game. You fucking lobby the government and get them to give free money. It's like, you're like, that was part of the game, like going in, and now you're saying like, oh, they have an unfair advantage. You go, yeah, that's why we went to this industry. Like, you know what I mean?
The too big to fail stuff where it's like,
yes. So like I'm not.
They're like, yeah, it's good over here. Become a bank.
I am generally I understand.
I'm not saying I necessarily think that. I'm just saying like
I understand that argument. I think the problem is basically I would argue that the government has so much power that lobbying it has ROI. That's like actually the problem. It's like 500K of lobbying gets whatever million of ROI, right? That's actually the bad part, I would argue. But so just continuing. So the maximalist, A, zero sum, okay? B, they think every millionaire, every bank and so on is corrupt because of this. C, they think they will call everybody fraud, charlatan, shill, scammer, grifter. One other thing is maximalists, even more than they hate in some ways, fiat currency, they hate so-called shitcoiners, right? What's a shitcoin?
The Luna guy.
Well, so that's the thing is, see, okay, Bitcoin, so let's talk. Well, okay, right, perfect.
What did Danny say?
I thought the maxis say anything that's not Bitcoin is a shitcoin.
See, you guys it was perfect. What you just did was perfect. You know why? Because
he lost his house in Luna.
Right, because
the second one.
Well, because what would somebody define a racist as? Some people would say a racist is genocidal Hitler, etc. Okay, some would say it's a person who asks you curiously what country you came from.
Yeah, where are you really from?
No, but not even that. Not even that. Just like making conversation on the bus or whatever, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Whereas it's the equivalent is someone says a scammer is the guy that like nefariously takes grandmother's money.
Or it's somebody who likes Ethereum.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. All right. So like part of this is actually pretty interesting, right?
I love it. Yeah.
The spectrum is intentionally something where it's so wide to encompass the most innocuous of behavior. I mean, look, we've seen all these articles like, BuzzFeed or Specialized that, Cheerios is racist or whatever. Like, you could probably just you should do a show, by the way, where you just take 100 headlines, 200 headlines. Oh, you have
that video. That was like a pretty viral one.
All right, okay, I'll go watch it. Basically, the most ludicrous things. Any one of them that charge, maybe you can read the argument.
I did a how-to blogging too, and you like take all the things, but I showed all the articles. It'd be like,
here's how to argue something is racist.
No, it'd be like, you have like a one wheel that's like a noun, one wheel that's like the verb, and
one
wheel that's like the ism.
Oh, is this the BuzzFeed like throw the darts thing? Was that you guys?
No, it was. But it's like a game. But basically, at the end of it, I used all the real like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Whatever.
Okay. So the thing is that part of the game here for them, even though it's not like conscious, is the spectrum is so wide that encompasses all normal behavior, and then you can get tagged as racist, and then boom, you're in the same bucket as like Hitler or whatever over here, right? So in the same way,
when I'm maybe Himmler.
Well, yeah, okay, right. So that's like the biological like attack or the race attack. Then on the other side is like the economics or government attack, right? And so that is something where, okay, there's like an actual fraud or something, and there's like somebody who likes Ethereum or someone who set up a company once. Fraud, right? Okay, and might say, why will fraud expand to everybody who starts a company? Well, now here's where you'll have
it's effective.
Well, so it is effective, but here's where you'll have to, you'll have to believe me here, or let's take this as, ad argumento, okay? Every company is an internet company today. By 2030 or 2040, every company will be a blockchain company because payments, incorporation, equity, wire transfers, crowdfunding, every operation.
That is wild, though.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone's kids like, Dad, can I have some Bitcoin?
Well, yeah, but not just Bitcoin, but like every operation that you can think of in finance, in a sense, international law didn't exist before blockchains. Let me explain why I say that. Okay. If you are a company in Brazil and you want to acquire a company in Bangladesh, there aren't too many Brazil-Bangladesh acquisitions. To even know what your compliance obligations are is non-trivial. So what happens? Lawyers will basically take a hub country, like the U.S. They'll say, okay, Brazil, U.S., that law is established. U.S., Bangladesh, that law is probably established. There'd be some deals there. Therefore, we will use a U.S. adapter to go between the countries.
Okay.
Right?
I didn't know that.
Or China is the other country that does business in like both those countries. So you'll use a U.S. adapter or like a Chinese adapter, typically. Okay? Why? Because now you've reduced this problem of end to end of every country versus every country to like one to n.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So in a real sense, international law. I mean, there's certain things that Brazil and Bangladesh will have some diplomatic relations or whatever, but for some complicated acquisition, who the heck knows? That might be the only one that year. Okay. So the law is verbal. It's hard to understand what your obligations are, especially if it's in like two different languages. Who speaks both Portuguese and Bangladesh's language? Not too many. Okay. So, Portuguese and Bengali, there's probably some, but not too many, okay? But with the blockchain, a Brazilian and a Bangladeshi could just send Ethereum back and forth. They can interact in the same smart contract. It's all code, which is a universal language of all humanity.
So, yeah, that's another reason why this is replacing, like, the American center of
and the Chinese.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a decentralized center, a re-centralized center. Anybody can now, the size of what this does for economic growth is not yet being understood. A group of people from anywhere can incorporate a vehicle on chain with a very fixed and known rule of law. They can issue shares, all this stuff, when I say issue shares, et cetera, the existing legal system doesn't like this. The US SEC, et cetera, is fighting this, et cetera. Eventually, as the current generation passes and whatnot, just like with the internet, the US government fought encryption tooth and nail. And now HTTPS is mandatory for all websites, https.cio.gov. It's a mandatory thing. The thing that was forbidden is now mandatory, okay? In the same way, eventually, the efficiency benefits of just having everything on chain will overwhelm the kind of stick-in-the-mud legacy regulators who want to maintain their power. And so what that means is every company, just like it's an internet company, every company is a crypto company by 2030 or 2040. It'll be like super obvious then, just like the internet thing where now people have, the term retcon? Like retroactive continuity? No. People have sort of retconned it to think the internet thing is much older than it is. But when I say it's 10 years old, you're like, you're kind of right. You kind of
the one that we know it is really.
Yeah, the internet world that we know.
Anything relevant.
Yeah, it wasn't like during the 2000s people were like, yeah, .com, that's the next thing.
Yeah, you were like, you had ICQ, but like whatever.
That's it. Yeah, people could basically ignore the internet in the 2000s, right? So there might be a long period where you think you can ignore Web3. Okay. But then eventually it'll be something where, wait a second, there's like, it might be the crypto phone, for example.
So from like a normal person standpoint, Is there any relevance to being like, oh, let me try to get ahead of this, or is it just like, yeah, it'll come when it comes, and then you almost won't even notice. You'll just be like, oh, my TV's like this now.
Yeah,
and
so I'll come back to that point. Okay, it's a very, very good point. Let me close out one point and then close that point out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the reason I mentioned every company becomes a crypto company, every company is on chain because it's just better for international trade, for wire transfers, for all that stuff is just faster. It's more programmable. It's just better. If you go and send a wire transfer and then send some money, and
it doesn't work very good.
No.
Yeah, if
insurance and stuff, right? Like, isn't title insurance a huge thing in blockchain?
Well, so anything that deals with the offline world is still hard. Okay, just like it took. I mean, Facebook and Twitter had to work before Uber and Airbnb did.
Yeah.
Okay, they had to. It was still hard to make the online stuff work. Servers went down and so on. So all that stuff had to work, and you had to have Rails and Django, all these like back-end tools before you could then start projecting the internet down onto the land, right? So stuff you're talking about the title. Yes, during the mortgage crisis, a huge part of the problem was that they sliced these things up into securities and lost track of everything. And in theory, blockchains could make that way better. In practice, the issue is you need some redeemer that's going to map that title to an offline physical property. So you're going to need crypto-friendly jurisdiction. Yeah, you need something like a Wyoming, for example, right? That's a crypto-friendly jurisdiction that marries the online, like feasibility with the offline jurisdiction. Okay, but I want to close out one point, then come to your point, then pop off the stack. Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you were able to stay a little later.
All right. So why are the crypto company? How is that relevant to what I was saying before? Well, if every company is a crypto company, and if every non-Bitcoin coin is a shitcoin, then every company becomes a scam.
Right. Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Right, because they're all just scams with shit. Their own shitcoins.
That's right. And so this is actually similar in some ways. Like,
I have this media company. We're not online. Yeah, we're just like a analog one. And you go, okay, so not a company.
That's right. So for example, medieval Christianity had a prohibition on usury, money lending, right? Communism had a prohibition on profit, and Bitcoin maximalists have a prohibition on issuance.
What's that?
Okay, so
more shares.
Usury is like interest on a loan, right? Communists are against profit. Just profit itself means you're scamming somebody, right?
Bitcoin's against any dilution of the
issuance. Exactly, issuance of new shares of any kind.
Right? They don't even have to be against it because in Bitcoin you can't. But they're saying all these other ones, you're just giving people fake money.
Yes, it's all pre-mined shitcoins. It's scams.
Right? You're like, hey, have this money. You're giving. He's like, you're giving everyone fake money right now.
That's right. So, but let me explain why that's actually incorrect economically. In the same way that the Christian who's against usury, there's a good way of saying, hey, don't be in excessive debt. There's a bad way of saying, hey, let's kill all the money lenders, because if you don't have interest, you literally cannot compare two investments against each other. It breaks the system for a power user of money. The whole concept of net present value, all this stuff that your finance guys
someone else will just come along and do it too.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically like you need to have interest because you literally cannot price different investments against each other if there's no rate of return.
That's the biggest factor, right?
Yeah, it is true that you don't want to get an excessive debt. That part is true. It is also true that
true that you can be predatory with it.
All that is true, but it is also true that you need interest rates, right? In the same way with profit, right? The communist takes the intuition that, that guy's making too much margin or whatever, and turns into all profit is a scam. Okay?
Yeah. And you're like, well, no, because like that is actually what that money's worth, because it's like that's what it would have been gaining him other places.
So a useful way of thinking about it, I finally put some words onto this. There's seller profit. There's also buyer profit. You know what buyer profit is? How much money would it take you to build an iPhone from scratch?
Me, I could probably do it for like 15.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So, but point is that's like whatever millions of dollars, right? Versus
infinity.
Infinity.
It's like if you have to build your own foundries and stuff.
I don't think I'd be sitting there but like I'm just $5 short.
That's right. So that millions of dollars comes down to like $400, right? Buyer profit is like your margin in that sense, right? Another way of thinking about it is, obviously if you're running like a convenience store and you buy milk for $2 and you can resell it for $5, your buyer profit is like $3, right? But one way of thinking about it is buyer profit is the difference between your build cost and your buy cost. This is because if you could build for cheaper than you could buy, you just build, right?
Yeah.
But if you can't, this is basically a measure of like how much. It's another way of thinking about it, it's also your reserve price. How much would you actually pay for the thing versus how much did you pay for the thing? And so if you pay $20, you got it for $10. You made $10 in a sense of value, right? Historically, buyer profit has not been visible because seller profit is visible. They do accounting. Buyer profit, you don't do it. But whenever you've placed a limit order on a crypto exchange, if you've ever done that, you put a order down for, I'll buy one Bitcoin at $400, right? You are revealing what the max price you would pay is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Then if the market depth moves to it, ka-ching, your order is fulfilled. you have basically shown what your reserve price is. Point is, once you start thinking about in terms of buyer profit, that both parties to the transaction are coming out ahead, it's not, oh, this guy's getting money and this guy isn't, right? So that's the counter argument for the communist who says that profit is, malevolent, okay? Then for the maximalist, they say issuance is bad, okay? Why is issuance bad? And the thing is, each of these sort of quasi-religious movements pathologizes a different aspect of capitalism because they take the bad parts, which do exist, and they argue that the totality is the bad parts, which is not true, right? So the maximalists, why do they pathologize issuance? They say anybody who's issuing a new coin must be a scammer because look at all these scams. Therefore, all issuance is scams. All issuance is pre-mined, coins. It's all
has real religious vibes to it too.
It's
the
religious
undertones
vibes.
of like we're the religion. All these other ones, they're fake heathens.
In fact, both wokeness and maximalism have taken pieces of Christianity. You've got this Western civilization that's amidst the ruins of Christianity, and wokeness has taken some pieces, like the doctrine of original sin. I mean,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And you're going to a warm hell if you, with climate change, if you don't give up all your stuff and humble yourself and so on, right? And maximalism has taken other pieces. So they love the passage, for example, about Jesus throwing the money changers out of the temple. They love that one, right?
Really?
Those are my people.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So they
got thrown out of the temple.
Oh yeah.
So they post this, or they'll talk about the Genesis block, obviously, but how Bitcoin's founding was like the Immaculate Conception. They'll take that concept, right? So bits and pieces of Christian theology have made their way into these nominally secular ideologies, right? There's some beeping.
Clark, I think it's your phone.
Oh,
I think
okay.
it's just your phone.
Is that my?
Yeah, I don't know. These things interact with phones weird. It's super strange.
Just put this.
It's either your phone or your burner.
Yeah. All right, put this here. So with issuance, just to talk about that for a second, then I'll come to your other point. With issuance, it seems intuitive. Okay, well, aren't these shitcoins all scams, whatever, right? The thing is, but the one thing they're really big on that they don't like is the concept of pre-mined coins, right? Meaning 40% of coins are set up in this new coin for the founders and 60% go to the community. They hate this. Why? Because Satoshi, mined, and anybody, it could have been an open, kind of tournament. Anybody could be part of this, right? Well, first, just on the point of, Bitcoin was totally open. I think it was. However, something like 95% of Indians and 99% of Africans were not actually online in the late 2000s, early 2010s. So they couldn't feasibly have mined Bitcoin early on. So as a fair launch, it was probably as fair as Satoshi could have made it, but it wasn't actually universally fair in some sense. Some people had internet access, some did not. But the second point on the pre-mining, whenever you set up a company, you're pre-mining equity, okay? And why do you give out equity as well as cash to your employees? Why don't you just give out dollars? And go ahead.
Because you want them invested.
Well, yes, but deeply it's because, you might say, well, why aren't you just loyal to the U.S. economy, right? You work hard, you'll increase the dollars. This is the argument of the Bitcoin maximalists. Why don't you just hold Bitcoin, work hard, increase the price of Bitcoin, right? The issue is that...
You're saying the company will go up more than the dollar.
Well, yes, but
you
why?
want them to believe that.
But why? Here's why. The reason is your efforts can directly increase the value of equity. Why? Because in theory, the price of a share is related, or the value of the company is related to the net present value of all future cash flows. If the company is making money in years 3, 5, 6, 7, you can discount that to the present day, and that's the value of a share. It's $50 under this model, okay? If you work hard, you can bring in a deal for $5 million that boosts the value of those projected cash flows. Then you take that to a venture capitalist, they'll buy your shares. Okay, so therefore, your individual efforts connect to increasing the value of your shares. Okay, whereas you cannot really increase the value of the dollar this way. That's like a drop in the ocean. You can't control Powell monetary policy. Effort at such a large scale of hundreds of millions of people worldwide does not connect with reward.
Exactly.
So we come back to the communist thing, right? Remember in communist China, when those farmers couldn't get a cut of their own grain because they were expected to do everything for the collective. Here, you can go so far to the libertarian right that you are again against the concept of people getting returns on their own effort.
Right, because it's all for the common coin.
Is for the common coin, exactly, right? So, and you see all the pieces there.
Essentially being a maximalist of anything is generally this.
That's why maximalist equals fundamentalist equals supremacist equals zealot.
All this stuff, yeah.
Exactly, right? So that's why I think a better term, in my view, is optimalist, right? Not just in the sense of optimistic, but optimalist in the sense of also like the mathematical concept of optimizing the objective function. What is the optimal? The optimal is not necessarily the maximal. For example, imagine a group of people who call themselves Westists, okay, because they like the idea of California. They keep going west. Then they end up in California. They actually make it there. And now there's a fission within the group. Why? Because some of them want to keep going west into the Pacific Ocean. What, are you an Eastist cuck? You know? Right? And so
I can very much imagine that conversation.
You can literally that conversation happens on Twitter. You should make that into a clip if you want. Okay, like that conversation happens on Twitter 1,000 times a day. And what it is, the reason is that ideologies are being used to steer. And if they're being used to steer, there's no stopping criteria, right? So let me give you kind of three versions, right? The first is ideologies as steering that just are extremist, and too much is never enough. There's literally no stopping point. You can never be maximalist enough. You can never be fundamentalist enough. You can just
or even
never be woke enough.
Probably even more so. It's like there'll always be someone that could do it more than you.
Yes, and there's an endless Red Queen competition of this about like who is the purest of them all, and you just keep leapfrogging for higher and higher status using these words until you just get to like the la-la zone, but nobody can back off from it because they're all, you know, just like religious fanaticism, just pushing people off a ledge, right? So that is kind of, you know, no steering, okay? Then the second version, which is the hypocritical version, is like the New York Times Company version. Talk left, act right, okay? So they're for the Iraq war before they're against it. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
They are, you know, for the, you know, the Chaz zone, you know, in Seattle, before they're against it.
Yeah.
Okay? And so they steer like this, and they kind of make money both ways on this, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but you're to blame. Right, like you're the bad guy, right? No matter what, you're to blame, right? So
they sort of almost like agree with you after, and they were like, yeah, but like you should have like you at least tried the other one first.
That's right. So for many people, the safe strategy is to just stick with the party line and then reverse on it, and then reverse, right? This is the same actually as, you know, the Trump supporters who were. They were prepping for the coronavirus, and then suddenly the coronavirus wasn't anything, and then they were for the vaccine, and then they were against the vaccine, right? They also like flipped like 4 times. You know, this is basically like it's tribal as opposed to ideological. So this is, but they're using ideological words to talk about it. Really, what it is I do not trust the other tribe. That's fundamentally what it is. It's universalist language for particularist ends. Okay, so this is the first version is being so ideological that you go off a cliff. The second is just flipping your messaging to steer like this without ever acknowledging it to yourself or to others. Right?
Yeah, because I guess a lot of it is you see just like, you know, if you were running a big company, you're just like, yeah, people are you gotta fucking say stuff so they get off your back, and it's like it's almost irrelevant, you know?
Yeah, you basically, like, once you think about it as steering, it's like crowd control. Like, okay, we need to go left for a while, let's put out some...
Tell what whatever these fucking peasants will think, and you go, what about you just said the other thing, you go, they're fucking stupid.
Yeah, concrete example. Yeah, no, exactly, because if they have if they have distribution, then you can't contradict, right? A great example is in 2020, America was supposedly so systemically racist that George Washington, everything had to be torn down, rebuilt, etc. Now, in 2022, what's the message? America is the global champion of democracy, and all of these non-white countries need to listen.
I never even thought of that one. That's a pretty good point.
Ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Like these two things. This is domestic propaganda meant to win a domestic conflict, right?
We need to spread the thing. Well, maybe I guess their argument is that like we enlightened now, but
so the enlightened, the tribe that wins is also the tribe. So but obviously, of course, the internet has collapsed this context, and this propaganda isn't even that old, right? So
no.
You know, so basically,
we got enlightened 4 years ago.
If you're sitting in India,
but you started doing all this like international democracy spending way before that. It's like, we started a little early. We get a head start.
If the president of the United States is saying America is so systemically racist, blah blah, how could like an Indian or a Nigerian or something possibly say, okay, you should be the leader of the free world? You said you're a racist.
We're a white supremacist country. All right, let's do some stuff in India. I don't know. Aren't we white supremacists? Exactly. Not. You know, it is what it is.
It is what it is, right? So think about this.
Shut up.
Right. So this is what I mean by like steering, right? And it was actually, this is what Orwell also wrote about when he was like, Eurasia is now at war with East Asia. You know, basically these giant, like, you know, the Soviets and the Nazis, they would put out one message one day, and then they put out the next message the next day, just as it turned convenient. For example, up until 1939, the Nazis and the communists were, they're at odds with each other, etc. Then Molotov-Ribbentrop, the Nazis and Soviets signed a pact. Do you know they started World War II allied with each other?
Who?
The Nazis and the Soviets?
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. They invaded Poland together. Okay? And so 1939 to 1941, all these communists around the world got the order to like U-turn. Now they're pro-Nazi. Oh, and then 1940, they U-turn again. Now they're anti-Nazi, right? And these kinds of. Go ahead.
He's been pro the whole time.
Yeah, right. So the point is, these sort of like head-snapping reversals are, basically something that you're seeing during these like ideological times, right? And so why did I bring this up? So the first version is just the Westist failure mode, where you just go and fall into the ocean. Okay. The second mode is sort of the hypocritical tribalism, where it's both systemically racist and the global champion of democracy as suits the moment or whatever, right?
It needs to be, yeah.
As it needs to be, right? And and it's less effective because now those are not separate channels, right? It's not like you can just message domestically one thing and globally a different thing. Those are all merged into one channel.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's context collapse, right? So there's a problem for the messaging apparatus on this. And the third model is what I call optimalism. Here you admit that you have a group, that you have an interest, that you're trying to optimize that interest. You are acting in that self and other interest, but you're not like in this insane Conan the Barbarian way, right? One way of thinking about it, people talk about how communists don't understand self-interest. A lot of nationalists don't understand other interest. Okay.
Yeah.
What would be an example?
So obvious example is, Hitler, who he even thinks the Slavs are Untermenschen. Okay. So the guys next door, you like kill, lots of, those people. But lots of nationalists don't assign any weight to the interests of people in other countries.
Okay.
They just care about their own country.
That's right. And I understand where that's coming from. The problem is that
they affect you.
The way to win is win-win. Like that's the way to.
You don't want to play this. You don't want to make it a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You want to make it.
If you go out like during the Trump administration, like.
But I think that I think that if I was to like understand some of those people's points, they're just like, yeah, like it's more important to us to have like our culture to some degree maintained than these like economic battles. You're going to lose out. They're like, we don't care. Maybe that would be the argument.
I do understand. I do understand where it's coming from. However, I think center right beats like nationalist. I mean, it's complicated, okay? But I think that if you can figure out how to get other people around the world to also win, you can build a larger coalition. And because what you can't have is something where you're like, America, and then want people from around the world to support you. But you kind of need that in order to maintain that position in the world. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You kind of need to...
Or you need like a big war where you're the hero.
Yeah, I totally understand why somebody who is attacked, for their culture, and so then they rise up like this and they're like, yeah, fuck you, my culture's great, I totally get where that's coming from. It is, however, a trap because rather than, this is sort of like the U.S. versus China kind of thing. Like the U.S. has become this thing that doesn't actually, the only rule of the rules-based order is the U.S. is number one. China sees this and is like, okay, well, we're just also going to act completely in our own interest as we see it. And they're completely unpersuasive on the world stage as a consequence, right? But the third version is actually say a different tack, which is, yeah, you're not having the rules-based order, but we want one. We want one to protect both large and small countries, both people in there. And now, of course, that's much easier said than done. How do you have like a muscular classical liberalism? And that's where crypto comes in.
Yeah,
right?
and also all the stuff that they hate is like mostly coming from within anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so I think like this is something where,
is that the like meme like crypto solves this? Like it's
it's kind of the meme. Bitcoin solves it, right? But the thing is that
but decentralization it does like it just actually does solve most problems.
That's right. It does. It's at least today it solves a lot of problems.
But it's like how do you do it ever is like it's like easier said than done is also.
Let me give a concrete example. So Ben Franklin, he's an American patriot. Okay, it's hard to be more patriotic than Ben Franklin, but he built bridges with the French to beat the UK. Okay, so he was an internationalist and a nationalist. He was able to see outside of his own self-interest to ally with the French, against the communist.
You can probably think about that in your personal life. The same way.
That's right. So like the smart nationalist is not like a chest thump, America F yeah, but it's somebody who thinks about diplomacy and alliances and coalitions and so on so that they advance their self-interest and other interest,
Yeah, or as opposed to someone who's like, you either have to only care about yourself or you have to be like the service of others and you're like, well, both,
exactly.
In between kind of.
It's like super obvious if I say it this way, but any CEO does that as well. They have to care about some degree their own company's interest. But if you're doing a deal, the whole point is empathy and understanding where the other guy's point of view is, and maybe you can give on X and Y and Z, and you come out to a win-win. Win-win is so obvious, yet it is like the V3 and the thing I was talking about, right? How can you get to a win-win? It's not always obvious how to do it. The goal is obvious. The way to do it is not.
Yeah.
Okay? One other thing I'll just say is I am a fan of when you have involuntary centralization, then we need decentralization, and I'm a fan of that. But I think that the most important, least popular word in the world now is re-centralization. Because just like, when people exit a burning building, okay, that's like decentralization, get the F out. But then they regroup at a site.
Is that just like how every idea is like a packaging or unpackaging?
Yeah, it is. Exactly. It's like, so, you have, it's unbundling and bundling, right?
Unbundling and bundling.
Unbundling and bundling, right? So you have, like newspapers and they're broken up into articles and rebundled into Twitter feeds, or you have CDs and they're broken up into MP3s, rebundled into Spotify playlists. There's like dozens of examples. I've got a tweet thread on this. And so the goal is not totally, it's neither centralized tyranny nor decentralized anarchy, but opting out of centralized tyranny. There's a period of decentralization, and then you re-opt in. It's a rebirth of society. Okay, you have voluntary re-centralization. You have all of these leaders around the world of these various network states, and this is the vegan one, and this is the CrossFit one, and this one, it's like Turkish immersion. You can learn Turkish there or whatever. Oh, and this one, everybody dresses like they're from the 1950s. Whatever. Just like, different.
Yeah, it's every permutation of that.
Every permutation where now you can basically pick and you get your digital passport effectively and you just go and live there, right?
Fat slob.
Go ahead. Fat slob society. There you go.
Fat gay slob society.
Love it.
I was almost going to leave it.
All right. So you asked one other thing, which is like, how do you get into this future or what have you if you like it, and
or like if you're like young or whatever, 25, and you're just like, if this new world's like happening, what's the ways to get involved and what does it look like?
So I would say, let's branch on, can you do math or not? Okay, if you can do math, learn computer science and learn statistics. That's like
I feel like I can do math. I'm not going to learn computer science.
Okay, fine.
If not just me, obviously.
Sure.
Other people.
So if you can do math, then learn CS and learn stats. Why? That's like the
What's CS?
Computer science.
Okay.
Learn computer science.
Not going well so far.
I know that. I know.
So far, not good.
Now I got the acronym now.
Okay, got the acronym. Okay, so learn computer science, learn stats. Because that's like the physics of the digital world,
I got
right?
Stats.
Okay, why? Like, physics is the physics of the physical world, and like fluid mechanics and all that stuff. That was all incredibly useful in the 1800s.
That's stressful to most people, though. You're like, so there's this new world. What do I do? They're like, get really good at math and stats and physics. Everyone's like, I'm fucked.
Well, that's what I was saying. First branch is that, right? So the thing is, now increasingly, for example, what percentage of the time do you spend looking at a screen?
Too much.
Way too much.
I don't know that. I don't do I don't put the timer on it.
It's 6 hours.
I mean, I run a fucking digital media company.
Yeah, that's right. So but let's say probably close to 50% of your waking hours are spent looking at a screen of some kind. If you include your phone, you include your watch, and so let's say at least several hours a day.
Yeah, I don't factor in my computer, obviously, which is it's whole.
Fine.
I was just talking about my phone.
Okay, fine.
Not
so
good.
You add up your screen time. It's several hours a day, right? And so everything that's happening on that screen is governed by computer science, which is the algorithms, and then the data that's in databases, you analyze it with stats. Okay, so that allows you, whether you're going into Walmart or Johnson & Johnson, you're working with an apartment complex or a YouTube channel, every single organization of any kind for the foreseeable future will have need of people who are good at CS and stats. Okay, everywhere in the world, right? So that's like, if you're good at math, get good at those fundamentals. Okay, now. Physics that's also important to know, et cetera, but CS and stats will be immediately monetizable everywhere. That just pays the bills. Good, right? Now, if you can't do math, find somebody who can. No, I'm like half joking, but it's basically like
lock them into your basement.
Yeah. Lock them in, feed them. No.
What do I do with my gender?
Or her.
Yeah. Or them. Yes, exactly, right? So, if you can't do math, you can find like a.
So you're saying girls are fucked?
You can find a co-founder, you can find a friend or something, work with them, right? Or if you're good visually or verbally, create content, right? Basically, many companies.
Content, like moving into the future, is like.
Yeah, I think it's pretty big. Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's a content guy.
Well, yeah. The reason being because
every dentist is like his TikTok channel now. Like it really is.
Yeah, it is because
getting there.
The reason is like founding influencer is going to be on par with founding engineer. right? Or founding creator on par with founding engineer.
Well, it's part of the whole package. I mean, the
it's part of the
Logan
package.
Pauls of the world.
Yeah, Logan Pauls, because you can, if you want to just think about it from a pure, I always forget if it's left brain, right brain. Left brain is systematizing, right? Correct? And right brain is emotional?
I mean,
Let's
you're
say-
more likely to be right than me, probably.
I'm just-
I thought left was artistic.
Okay, fine. So let's just say systematizing brain, if you want to put that lens on it, the founding creator is the customer acquisition for whatever project you're doing. Okay? Every project has some need for quote marketing, but the most organic form of marketing is you've built a community and the product grows out of that community's needs, as opposed to it being, budded from on
I
high.
need a community for my music video app.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So like you guys have a community, and probably if you did enough like focus grouping or whatever in that, you would find that there were certain things that everybody said, hey, we would buy together.
Flashlights.
Auto blows.
No, you're right.
You have a very sophisticated clientele.
no. I did auto blow ads. That's why.
Yeah, and so you could probably angel invest in that. You could have an angel investor provide. So if there's somebody, either you have the capital yourself, or there's a lot of angel investors out there.
Yeah.
As a content producer, you figure
We've
out.
talked to some of your friends about doing like a movie and
There-
things like that. But
there you go.
that's still in the still selling content to the people like content as opposed to what you're talking about.
Exactly. So the thing is, I think one way of thinking about it is all content becomes content marketing, okay, or community building, and then you build a community because the thing is, look, selling a YouTube video or Substack, that's actually relatively cheap relative to solving a genuine problem in somebody's life, like the amount that they would pay for a genuine problem solved versus this, right? So another way of thinking about it, the Social Network movie, okay, it was you've probably seen it like in 2010, right? It did a few $100 million in box office, pretty solid.
Yeah.
If, however, the movie had been free and there had been a link at the end to invest in all the founders who came out of that, that would have made way more money.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Like by orders of magnitude more money. Okay.
I always have ideas for apps. Maybe I need an app.
So if you guys make what I'd call investable content, right? And that might seem at first.
No, but I know it's just the same as why it's like, if you're like a get rich YouTuber, like your ads are worth a fuck ton more because there's exactly what those people are all looking to buy stuff to,
And they're all trying to make money. So there's
but also
way more money.
if you're listening to Tim Ferriss, you're the type of guy that exactly what
has some
you're gonna
disposable income or whatever.
Yeah, but also you're gonna buy something that'll help get you fit. You're gonna buy something whatever.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everyone has a version of that, but certain markets, like if you're a girl that your audience is like 12 years old, like you might, I don't know, I guess if they're rich, but there's certain demos that are worth way more than others.
Exactly. Every community has some like level of stuff that they're getting that's not there.
Girls are worth more, actually.
Well, yeah, more household spending, I think, is by women, right? But so you have so that's the second approach, right? You're a content producer of some kind. You don't have to be an elite YouTuber or something like you guys, and
then you essentially interface with like blockchain people.
Not just blockchain people, just tech people in general, right? You've got your technical side, you've got your kind of humanity side, you've got two in a box, your engineer and your creator, and that happens at like the most senior levels of any organization, but also all kinds of junior levels down, even to like an individual product or an individual feature. You'll have somebody who's making like the video or the story or whatever for it, and the person who's coding it, right?
I've done a lot of that before.
You done a fair amount of that, right? So that's like those two, and then. As an investor, right, which is kind of a different thing. So these are active. This is where you're putting in labor, right? If you're on the math side or if you're on the content side. So that's if you're putting in your labor. If you're putting
that's
in
the future, math or content.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, like,
interesting.
Of course, there's more to it, but that's roughly how people cut it, right?
Some guys
not gender studies degrees.
See, told you when everyone was yelling at me last episode because I said that I don't care that I can't fix anything. And everyone was calling me a bitch.
Content is valuable. It's very valuable, right? Yes. So the code scripts machines, media scripts minds. And so you need to kind of be able to program both, and so that's why you need both. And
ooh, that's a good one.
Right? And so the third is capital. So now, as opposed to labor, where you're putting in your time, capital, you're putting your money. Everything is now opening up in terms of investing. That is a big thing about Web3 is you will be able to invest in basically anything, okay? What I mean by that is if you have some bet that, one way of thinking about it, and this is not super obvious, but many things, and I probably need to go in a bit. Many things are a form of arbitrage. Okay, so for even like a little deli or a convenience store, let's say convenience store, that's a form of arbitrage. Why? Because they're buying water bottles wholesale and they're selling it retail. Okay, they have some thesis on how many people come into their store and what price they'll pay. They'll pay $5 or whatever, and they'll buy them for $2. I don't know the exact price. Let's just say something like that, right? So arbitraging that this thing wholesale is worth more retail, and they're making money on the difference of that, right? Now you take that convenience store and you turn it
Give
into...
them a TikTok.
Well, wait, almost.
There's so many bodegas in New York that are all over TikTok.
Okay, so you're almost there. Okay, so but let's go step two. Step two is you take that convenience store and you virtualize it. Now it's on Uber Eats. It's a digital storefront. Okay, maybe it doesn't even exist, like in the sense of like in normal sense, like you think that there's a physical storefront that matches. Now more and more things are just built for Uber Eats or built for Grab. They're so-called cloud kitchens, back-end type things.
The ghost kitchens and all that stuff.
Yeah, and now they can just change the decor with a new graphic designer. That content creator makes different art, and this is the Liquid Death branded water, and this is the other, so now you can try different aesthetics, different copywriting. Anything. I mean, water is, by the way, like almost a perfect example of just how branding can differentiate. You've got Evian, you've got all these different things, right? Okay, so you have these different storefronts. You can actually iterate on your different storefronts. You can also iterate on like your store's positioning. You can't move your physical convenience store that easily, right? Though store placement is a huge consideration for Starbucks and others. But your digital store, you can be, you can place your Uber Eats ads in all these different locations. You can figure out, people, where they really want water? At Jones Beach. Okay, there they really want. I want my convenience store on Jones Beach. I want to advertise to these people here, but not other places. Boom, cold water right now, okay? So now you've virtualized that store, and now you've got a more focused arbitrage proposition, right? More of it is being digitized. You're literally buying X and selling Y with this like virtual storefront there. Now your TikTok guy comes in to drive people to that storefront, okay? And when you start thinking about it this way, many businesses are, in a sense, a form of arbitrage. They're buying wholesale, selling retail. Almost every store that you ever...
Retail's business model, period.
It's retail business model. That's like an enormous swath of stores are like this.
I guess unless you make it.
Yes, and so an enormous swath of stores are becoming digital storefronts, right? And so what happens is all of these things, not today, not next year, not in 3 years, but probably in 10 or 20 years, all those things become like Web3 bettable. Because you can now have some thesis on, okay, people are going to buy a lot more water today, and so you can, buy into that. Okay?
Yeah. And
like in terms of a token?
In terms of a token or in terms of some kind of derivative or some kind of asset.
You should be able to bet.
Well, they have like all the betting. We were talking about some betting market for, what were we talking about?
No, we were saying there needs to be a betting market for like that's attached to, like Andrew Tate became the biggest person in the world, then you don't hear about him again. Yeah. Not that you don't hear about him again, but like it's just no one is that popular for that quick.
Futures market on page views.
I guess it would be like impressions of the name, but like let's say we said like even like what would be like Ukraine or whatever, like just anything where you go
just the number of mentions of the word.
Yeah, it's like basically the popularity of someone like we like the same way you could bet on a creator. Where you, I just always said like like when you think of like an artist, I know that guy's gonna be bigger. I think that about it the first time I heard it. I was just like, this guy I'm gonna hear more from, because you could just tell. Like Jordan Peterson, I would have heard that. I remember I always say rapper 6ix9ine. I very early on I go, that guy's gonna be the biggest rapper. I feel like I've been right so many times about things,
and now you can bet on that.
Well, how?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So someone has to just take the other side of it, right?
Well, personal tokens are actually a primary sale, so you wouldn't have to. This is a great question. So, primary versus secondary sales. Do you know the distinction?
Well, primary, no.
Okay, so a primary sale
is where you issue it.
Your question is a very good one, so I'll give it.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. That's right. Primary sale is where you are issuing it or a company is issuing it. So, a venture capitalist, when it's a primary sale of stock, is buying the stock directly from the company and putting in $20 million, right? That is, primary sales in general are considered good because that money is going in and then that company is spending it on products which will increase the value of the stock for all parties by the mechanisms we discussed earlier, where you're increasing the NPV of the stock, right? The secondary sale is when that venture capitalist then goes and sells the stock to somebody else. That is now secondary, and money is changing hands between the two parties, but it's not going to the company for productive endeavors. Okay. So the similar concept can be extended to the issuance of a so-called personal token, which is just like the company sort of securitizes itself and sells some shares to fund current activities in the belief that it's going to become more wealth sharing in the future. But basically, yes, there are personal token. It's hard to build a startup or whatever. There are various personal token things. One of them will eventually work, and you'll be able to tokenize yourself. And so you're a kid in the middle of Moldova or Mexico, and now you can issue a token and you can get $30,000 of capital from people around the world speculating that you're going to be maybe the Mexican Jeff Bezos, or maybe not that big, but maybe you'll be like fairly successful. And now you can take that money and you can actually go and maybe get podcasting equipment or whatever it is, right?
That's the other time people like these days. It's like, what do you even do with capital? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so you might buy some equipment. They might buy a computer, do some AI stuff, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And then they've increased their productive capacity, and they sold some amount of this, and now the remaining tokens are worth something more, right? So that's like a primary sale, as you're saying.
And then people would just then start trading them to speculate on
that person. And you could have various lockups and stuff like that. He might not want anybody to hold their personal token. You might also make it so the personal token, the best probably model for that is you can redeem it for like 1 hour of the person's time.
Oh.
Right? So you're selling like 100 hours of your time.
So there is an actual utility.
There's a utility to it. And then you might put limits on that. It's like, okay,
that's some like Gary Vee shit, I feel like.
Yeah, you can't make them like dance naked or something like that, but you might make them be like a...
I won't be your butler for a week.
All right, different people will have different value propositions, right?
Some people will be like butler coin.
Like my time.
Yes.
Redeemed.
So
what do you want me to do? Just sit there in silence?
There'll be various restrictions on transfer and usage, whatever. But this way, people could just sell a few hundred. I mean, it's literally like consulting. It's micro consulting. If consulting is okay, this is just like that, right?
Yeah.
So it's sort of like speculative consulting. And if you had bought an hour of Bezos's time when he was 18, and now
yes.
Now you could cash that in, that would be worth a lot, and Bezos might just buy you out rather than waste his time.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's the kind of thing which I think is an interesting. Now, there's various issues around this, which is like, what if the guy just runs away with the cash, et cetera? And one way around that is so-called
or like
just says
doesn't redeem it.
And just like you can't get a hold of them.
Well, I guess at that point the exchange would have to be culpable, and then there's like something because of your something.
So this is to be worked out, but probably the best bet would be they have a .eth name like joesmith.eth, and this personal token is attached to that. And so is other reputation. They're like posting on social media with this and so on and so forth. So if they dodge, they have to sort of just abandon that entire name. And you're essentially betting that they've built up some reputation under this name so that, now you have some collateral effectively. They don't have to give up their quote state name necessarily, but they have collateral in the sense of this entire account and everything that's linked to it. People will see that this person didn't pay back that account,
and that's like the username of usernames essentially. Like your .eth it's like the ENS thing, right?
It's like the ENS thing. That's right. Yeah. That's something. So very specific recommendation for people. If you haven't got your .eth name, you should probably get it.
I bought mine last year. I spent $1,000 on it. I still don't know if it's a good use of money. But.
You'll probably be happy.
Okay, I'm gonna write down to get mine. But we should also put a pin. I'm starting to feel bad. You're like already an hour late here.
Anyway,
dude, that is very nice of you to stay an extra hour, and it was like super cool hanging out. But
cool.
Everyone can go to the Network State, like
thenetworkstate.com.
Networkstate.com.
It's free online.
And then the cool thing was you have like a one sentence, a one paragraph, and then and
it's updated constantly.
Yeah,
it's updated. That's right. So I'm going to try and do
it's like a new version of a book.
It's a living book.
It's a living book. That's right. It's actually, what's funny is it's actually pretty hard to update on Kindle. So the website is actually the best version of it.
Right.
Yeah, Kindle itself is actually
just you update it and takes you process it again.
Takes a long time, etc. So the V2 of the book will be. Hopefully sometime next year. There'll be a lot of stuff coming up, but I'm just intermediately updating it en route. So go check it out. Let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, and then on Twitter.
Twitter, I'm at Balaji S on Twitter, and it's also at the Network State on Twitter.
Hell yeah, dude, you're the man.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
The boys.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The lads.
It's the BOYSCAST.
The